This happened about a year and a half ago when I was 20. At the time, I was working evenings at a small cafe in a shopping district near the train station that I lived by. It wasn't the busiest place, and on slow nights the manager trusted me to close by myself. I usually finished around 10:30 p.m. and walked home since I lived close. On this particular night, things were unusually quiet, I would say. Around 10:15, just as I was stacking chairs and wiping tables, the bell above the door jingled and a man walked in. That already felt strange. Nobody ever came in that late except the occasional regular grabbing a coffee to go or something. But this guy, he wasn't a regular. He looked mid-30s, maybe early 40s, neat jacket, clean-shaven, but something about him felt immediately off. He didn't order coffee or food, and instead he asked if he could have an empty paper cup. I hesitated, but then gave him one, thinking that maybe he just needed some water. But instead of heading to the counter or the bathroom, he walked straight to a corner table, set down a small bag, and pulled out a glass bottle. Not wine, not beer, but it looked like some kind of hard liquor, I would guess. He twisted the cap off, poured half into the cup, and drank straight from the bottle. I kept glancing over, trying to not make it obvious, but he wasn't just drinking, he was performing almost, taking huge swigs, then sort of swaying and muttering under his breath like he was in the middle of a conversation that only he could hear. Well, at one point he even clapped his hands and laughed out loud, and that startled me a bit. I wanted to ask him to leave, but I was alone, and something told me just to not provoke him. 5 minutes before closing, I announced to the cafe that we were shutting down. He didn't move. My stomach tightened, but eventually he got up and walked to the counter and slid something across it. A wrapped candy bar. "For you," he said, with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Thanks for being kind." I sort of gave a nervous laugh and said, "Yeah, thanks," and he left. I exhaled in relief until I picked up that candy bar. The wrapper looked normal at first, but when I pressed it in between my fingers, I realized that it was misshapen, almost like it had been cut and glued back together. Something was also rattling inside of it, too heavy to be chocolate. That's when my friends came over. They'd been hanging out at a corner table waiting for me to finish my shift. I hadn't really spoken to them while working, so from a distance the guy might have not realized that they were with me. I showed them the candy, and all of us agreed that it was wrong. We were laughing nervously about it when one of my friends went to the restroom, and a minute later she came back pale, asking which one of you was knocking on the wall. None of us had been, but she swore that she heard clear, deliberate knocks from the other side, in the men's bathroom. That was when the atmosphere changed. Suddenly, none of us were joking anymore, and we decided to check. We pushed open the door to the men's restroom, flicking on the lights, and froze. The handicap stall, the one right against the wall that she had heard the knocks from, was closed. The door hung slightly off its latch, not locked, but not wide open either. My heart was pounding in my throat. None of us wanted to go near it. After a tense silence, we backed out and returned to the cafe floor. I finished counting the register as fast as I could, turned off the lights, and I headed to the back door where the keypad was. And just as I reached it, we all heard it. The back door was opening, and then it closed. We weren't near it. None of us had touched it. The cafe was supposed to be sealed once I locked the front earlier. My friends and I just sort of stared at each other, realization hitting us at the same time. There had been somebody in that restroom, someone seemingly waiting. Now, the man with the liquor, the strange candy bar, the knocking, the door, it all connected in the ugliest way. What if I had been alone, like I usually am on slow nights? What if I had actually eaten the candy, or confronted him? I try not to think too hard about it, but sometimes when I close up late, I still feel eyes on me from that corner table, and I always double-check the restroom stalls before shutting down. Always now. I grew up in a small coastal town in Ireland, and this happened to me when I was around 8 years old, so roughly 15 years ago now. It was during the summer holidays, and my family had driven out of town to attend a weekend folk festival by the water. The festival wasn't anything wild, mostly families or older folks, enjoying fiddles and guitars, food stalls selling fried fish and sweets, kids chasing each other around the grass and whatnot. Security was present, though not heavy-handed, and the whole place had this safe, wholesome sort of atmosphere to it. My mum was expecting my younger brother at the time, so she stayed mostly seated with some family friends, while my dad wandered with me and another boy my age. I wasn't interested in the music at that age, of course, but what I do remember is the candy floss, the lemonade, and the way the air smelled like salt from the sea mixed with fried food. To my young mind, it all felt exciting but harmless. Well, as the evening went on and one of the last bands was playing, I told my dad that I needed to go to the bathroom. He sent me off to the other boy's father, and we made our way toward the portable toilets, lined up near the edge of the grounds. I finished quickly and stepped aside to wait, just a little bit removed from the crowd and the lights. And that was when I saw him. A man, maybe late 50s, though he looked older from the hard living carved into his skin, shuffled toward me from the shadows behind the toilets. His clothes were filthy, torn at the sleeves, and he reeked of stale drink and sweat. His skin was blotchy and burned from the sun, his lips cracked, and when he smiled at me, I realized that he was missing most of his teeth. I remember my whole body tensing. Even as a kid, I knew something about him wasn't right. But I'd also been raised to be polite, so when he spoke, I froze instead of walking away. "You're on your own, aren't you?" he asked, his voice slurred but sharp enough to send a chill through me. He pulled a few coins from his pocket and held them out with trembling fingers. "Why don't you come with me? I'll get you something better than this festival food." I shook my head and tried to step back, mumbling that I needed to find my dad. His expression shifted instantly. His smile dropped and something mean flickered across his face. "Don't be stupid," he snapped. And suddenly his hand shot out, gripping my wrists so tightly that I yelped. He leaned closer, his breath hot and sour. "Come on, just walk." I screamed. Not just a little, but loud, panicked shrieks that tore my throat raw in the end. I kicked and I tried to pull away, but he yanked harder, dragging me toward the dark gap between the portable toilets and the fence. Two men nearby heard me and they came running. They didn't hesitate too. They grabbed the stranger, shoving him back and slamming him on the ground. He thrashed and cursed, his face twisted with rage. And within seconds, the boy's father emerged from the toilets and rushed to help hold him down. I remember stumbling backward, shaking so badly that my knees almost gave out. The other boy came running too, eyes wide, asking what had happened. By then, a couple of security guards had arrived and they forced the man up on his feet, dragging him away as he screamed obscenities at all of us. I was led back to my mum, who went pale when she saw me. My dad's face turned red with anger when he heard, and he wanted to go after the man himself, but the guards had already taken him off the grounds. Oddly enough, too, the police never showed up. Maybe security didn't bother filing anything, or maybe they just wanted him gone. At the time, I calmed down after a while, distracted again by music and lights, but looking back, it unsettles me more than I like to admit. I mean, that man wasn't just drunk. He was deliberate. He knew what he was doing when he grabbed me. and to this day, I avoid anyone who looks intoxicated or unstable when I'm out. I also keep an eye on them, especially if they're lingering around children, because now I realize just how easily that night could have ended completely differently. And if I ever have kids of my own, you can be sure of one thing. I will tell them again and again to never talk to strangers. I once rented a tiny flat in an old row house in Glasgow. The building had stood since the late 1800s, though by the time that I lived there, it had long been chopped into cramped sort of bed sites and student rentals, all that sort of thing. From the street, it still kind of had a weary dignity, I guess. Tall stone facade, arched windows, iron fence, but inside it was a real patchwork of peeling wallpaper, warped floors, and the faint, sour smell of damp that just never went away. But it was cheap, and I was broke, and really that was enough. For the first month, the place was just old, really. Drafts slipped in through the cracks in the window frames, pipes rattled when anyone upstairs turned on a tap, and the hallway groaned every time that someone walked through it. None of that really bothered me too much, I guess. I mean, old buildings make noise, right? That's what I told myself anyway. But once winter came, things shifted. It started with me waking up, always around the same time, 3 in the morning, sometimes a little bit later, but never before. My eyes would snap open, heart hammering as if something had pulled me from my sleep, and in the silence, I would hear it. The floorboards in the corridor outside of my room. Not random creaks, not the occasional pop of wood expanding in the cold. These came in pattern, slow and measured, like footsteps, someone moving carefully as if they didn't want to be noticed. At first, I thought it was the tenant across the hall, but when I asked, they swore that they were sound asleep at that hour. And every morning that I checked the locks, both the main door to the building and my flat's door were bolted from the inside, which means that no one had entered, and also nobody had left. Still though, the footsteps returned, night after night. Sometimes they would stop halfway down the corridor, other times they would come right up to my door. That was when I began leaving the lamp on too. I thought that it might help, but it only seemed to make things worse, really. With the light on, the thin strip beneath the door glowed faintly, and I saw them there the first time from that lamp. Shadows. Feet. 2 dark shapes, utterly still, standing inches from the threshold. I stared at them until my eyes ached, just waiting for them to shift, but they never did. Eventually, exhaustion would claim me, and I would wake to sunlight, the hallway empty. Well, weeks passed and my nerves frayed for sure. I started sleeping at a friend's place, in the university library, or anywhere but there. And yet when I did, the ritual just never changed. 3 in the morning, footsteps, silence, and waiting. And then one night, I finally looked too long. The footsteps, they came closer and closer until they stopped right outside, like they always did. The familiar shadow settled beneath the door. I held my breath, and then they moved. Not away, not toward me, but down. The dark shapes bent low, flattening across the floor, which means whoever or whatever was on the other side of the door wasn't standing anymore. It had seemingly dropped onto its stomach, pressing its face close to the crack, like it was listening, like it was trying to get an inkling if I was inside or something. I couldn't scream. I just sat there frozen, watching that strip of shadow remain there, steady and patient, until the first grey wash of dawn crept in, and only then did it seem to just sort of vanish. After that, I barely stayed there at all, too. I carried my keys everywhere, even from room to room. I stopped turning the light off, and still, the steps came, even when I wasn't in the flat. In fact, I would hear them faintly if I came home too late. They would always disappear, but still, I know that I heard them. When my lease was finally up, I mentioned it to the landlord almost as a bit of a joke, like, by the way, you've got a ghost pacing your hall at night. But he didn't laugh. He just stared at me for a long moment before asking, "Which flat were you in?" When I told him, his expression immediately changed. He explained that decades earlier, long before the building was split up, there had been a death in that corridor apparently. A man found face down just outside what was my door. No one ever figured out how he died, and honestly, I didn't want to find out either. I just left it at that, moved cities, and I started fresh. But sometimes, even now, I'll wake at 3 in the morning for no reason at all still, and in that heavy silence, I always listen because, I don't know, it still bothers me, I guess. That slow, deliberate creak of footsteps, the pause at the door, and then the sound of something lowering itself to the floor. I get chills, even thinking about it. A few years back, I worked the night shift at an assisted living facility just outside of Manchester. I wasn't a CNA, but a night attendant, which meant a lot of charting, wellness rounds, and answering call lights. The nights were always quiet and a little bit eerie. Long corridors lit by only dim sconces, the hum of the heating system, and the occasional cough from a resident's room was atypical for the place. On weekends, we usually ran short-staffed too, and to make sure that everyone could have a proper break, we covered each other's halls for 30 minutes at a time. I usually worked on Wing C, but one night I was working to cover Wing A while my co-worker grabbed food. At first, it was routine. I parked myself at the little desk halfway down the corridor, catching up on paperwork. Wing A had a different feel than mine. The lighting seemed a bit harsher, I guess, the walls narrower, and I swear the silence pressed harder against your ears there. But it was fine. Well, at least until the bathroom alarm went off. I glanced at the panel and saw the red light flashing for a shared restroom, one between the two rooms. That wasn't unusual in itself, except both rooms were, well, impossible. One of them belonged to a man who was completely bedridden. He had severe mobility issues, he couldn't even roll himself over without help. And the other room had been empty for weeks, waiting for a new admission. Still, duty is duty. I grabbed my keys and went down the hall, telling myself that it was probably a wiring fault. But when I stepped into that bathroom, instantly my stomach dropped. The call cord wasn't dangling loose or broken. It definitely had been pulled. I mean, I had to physically reset it, which ruled out any kind of malfunction. Someone or something had triggered it on purpose. I froze there for a moment, listening. The room was silent, the air heavy and stale. No one in sight. No way the bedridden resident could have crawled in, and the empty room next door was exactly that. Empty. I was a little bit spooked by that as I realized that I was standing dead center between two impossibilities. But I tried to shake it off, muttering to myself about faulty systems, even as I knew that, really, that wasn't true. In any case, I reset the switch, hurried out, and practically sped-walked all the way back to the desk. I didn't take my eyes off of that hallway as well until my co-worker returned, and I didn't say a word about what had happened. Now, later that night when I was back on my own wing, I asked one of the older staff about Wing A, half joking and sort of trying to downplay how rattled I really was. She gave me this look, though, and said very flatly, "Oh, you got one of the bathroom calls." Apparently, this was not the first time. That same bathroom had been going off for years, allegedly, always when no one could have pulled the cord. Maintenance apparently checked it dozens of times and never found anything wrong. Some staff swore up and down that it was the spirit of a resident who died in there years ago, still trying to summon help. But I never covered Wing A again if I could help it after that. And even now, whenever I see one of those old-fashioned bathroom pull cords, I get the same chill down my spine, because I know what it feels like to reset one, knowing that nobody alive could have pulled it. I could use some advice because, honestly, I don't even know if I'm losing it or if something truly terrifying is happening. I haven't told my wife yet because, well, I don't want to sound completely insane, but this has been going on for months and it seems to be escalating. I'm going to try to be as detailed as possible. So I'm 29, married for just over 2 years to my wife Clara, and we have a 4-year-old son named Ellie. Back in March, we moved into a newly renovated townhouse in a quiet suburban area. It's 2 stories, 3 bedrooms, 2 baths, certainly nothing extravagant, but it's perfect for our little family. The day that we moved in felt normal too. Boxes everywhere, unpacking, setting up the nursery, that kind of thing. The first month or so was, well, pretty much uneventful, except for some minor things that I guess I just brushed off. Keys left on the kitchen counter that I knew I hadn't set there, and lights in the hallway flickering at random times, the odd faucet dripping a bit. I figured that it was just old wiring and plumbing and quirks and nothing more, and also my bad memory, but by April, the strangeness had started creeping into areas that really just couldn't be explained. Like, for instance, I began having incredibly vivid dreams every night, and in these dreams I'd be in my house, but it was always sort of distorted. Rooms were slightly off, hallways longer, shadows moving just out of sight. And waking up after those dreams was always disorienting, and I started waking up at around 1:30 in the morning, pretty much every night, regardless of when I went to sleep. Then came the physical sensations. So I would wake up with the unmistakable feeling of someone brushing against my arm or shoulder. At first I assumed I was shifting in my sleep, or maybe Clara was nudging me subconsciously, but she swore that she wasn't touching me. It happened too frequently, always the same time as well. There was also this feeling of, like, being watched, I guess you could call it. I could have sworn that I also caught fleeting glimpses of movement from the corner of my eye. Well, last night, or rather this morning I guess you could say, was definitely the most intense that I had ever experienced. So I got home from my late shift around 2:45 in the morning, planning to collapse on the couch and watch a show before bed. I must have fallen asleep at around 3:45, I would guess. TV still on, and at some point I felt the cold brush of something against my shoulder, jolting me upright. Heart racing, I scanned the living room, but everything seemed normal at first. Then I noticed it. The kitchen and the dining area were completely open, and every cabinet was now flung open. The pantry door was wide, the drawers were pulled out, the microwave door was hanging ajar, even the breaker box was open. I swear, too, that I didn't open any of these. My stomach dropped, and for a moment, I considered that someone had actually broken in. My son and Clara were asleep in their rooms, both sound asleep when I checked. I grabbed my pistol and began carefully checking each room, too. But there was nothing. No signs of forced entry, and nobody around. Every window was still locked, and the doors were all bolted. I even went outside and circled around the townhouse and checked the backyard a bit, but it was clear as far as I could tell. In fact, there didn't seem to be a soul in sight. Then, out of a mix of fear and curiosity, I guess, I snapped a photo of the kitchen and the living room, and the image came out absolutely horrifying. The photo was distorted, a swirling blur of colors that didn't exist in reality, like the room was sort of twisting in on itself. I couldn't make sense of it, to be honest, and it just made my skin crawl. I stayed up the rest of the night praying and shaking, trying to convince myself that it was exhaustion, but deep down I know that it wasn't. I don't know if it was some kind of entity, a malevolent presence, or if I've somehow become a target, but I'm planning to call a local priest tomorrow and ask for a blessing on the house. I've also started keeping a journal of every incident, recording times, dates, and descriptions, hoping to find a bit of a pattern. And the one consistent thing is that the disturbances happen when the clock is just after 1:30 in the morning, always in my living space, and seemingly never in the bedrooms too. So, has anyone experienced anything like this before? I'm desperate for advice, and I cannot tell if I'm losing my mind or if my home is truly haunted. So my friend Luca, who studies fine arts, rented an old countryside house with 5 of his classmates during their summer break. The house was isolated, sitting on the edge of a dense woodland in a small town in northern Italy. Nearby, there were some stagnant ponds, a crumbling chapel, and thick clusters of oak and chestnut trees. There were no neighbors for miles, just the faint sound of wind through the trees at night. From the very first evening, Luca felt off though. The house was structurally fine, creaky floorboards, peeling paint, and strange musty smell aside, but it carried an oppressive heaviness that he just couldn't shake. At night, he woke up abruptly, heart racing, convinced that he had heard footsteps in the hallway. The shadows in the corners seemed darker, and he also said that they almost seemed like they were moving. He shrugged it all off as exhaustion, but the next night it happened again, and again the night after that too. Each time he awoke with a tight knot in his stomach and a sense that something was watching him. It wasn't just him too, because a few nights later, while sitting on the back porch painting the sunset, Luca casually mentioned it to his friends. And to his shock, they all had been experiencing the same thing. Sudden awakenings, cold chills, and the sense of unseen eyes tracking them from throughout the house. One friend even reported seeing a faint silhouette standing at the top of the staircase, vanishing when he blinked. The group grew curious and asked around the nearby town about the house's history. The locals were wary and spoke in hushed tones, really. They told a bit of a grim story. Decades ago, a young man named Emilio had lived there with his family. He had been a bit of an outsider in the town, refusing to adhere to local religious traditions, and tragically, he died in a late-night motorcycle accident. And because of his non-religious stance, the townspeople refused to allow him burial in the consecrated cemetery. They said that his body was interred into an unmarked grave behind the house. According to the villagers, a priest had attempted to bless the house years later, but the blessing just never seemed to take. The strange phenomena had always persisted, lights flickering without cause, objects moving, footsteps echoing through the empty halls. Nobody ever stayed long. Even the caretaker who maintained the property refused to spend nights there, apparently. But over time, the friends began documenting their experiences. Doors would open and close on their own, sometimes even slamming shut with no wind. Windows rattled as though someone was outside tapping on them. Luca reported seeing a figure crouched in the far corner of the living room, staring at him while he sketched at one point, only to vanish when he blinked. One night he woke up to find a set of muddy footprints leading back from the back door into the house and stopping abruptly in the hallway with no explanation of who or what could have made them. The oppressive feeling grew worse at night too, apparently. Rooms felt colder, heavier, as though some unseen presence was pushing against them. I heard whispers in the darkness, incoherent at first, but occasionally forming words like leave or stay, in tones that made their hair stand on end. And by the end of their stay, the group was convinced that the house was haunted. Not by just a memory of the dead, but by the restless spirit of Emilio himself, trapped by resentment and isolation. Lucas swore, too, that even after leaving, the memory of the house stayed with him. The smell of damp earth near the back, the creaking of the floorboards in rhythm with the invisible footsteps, and that constant suffocating sense of just being observed everywhere you went. And years later, Luca refuses to return to that part of the woods again. He still paints, but never in the evenings and never near abandoned or secluded buildings, too. Something about that house, its silence, its shadows, and its history, left a mark that seems to have really stuck with him. Ever since I can remember, I've been able to, see things. Not just people or animals, but sometimes creatures that don't seem to belong anywhere in this world. Normally, it takes a lot to scare me, to be honest. So, when I say I was terrified, I really mean it. Now, I was about 7 years old at the time, visiting my cousin Mateo. It was at his house in a small town in northern Ohio. Mateo and I were extremely close too, almost like siblings in fact, and we spent every possible hour together when we could. His parents had always told him stories about imaginary friends when he was younger, supposedly to help him feel brave. One of these friends, they said, lived in the basement and was named Oliver. Oliver's job, according to Mateo, was to make the basement safe for him. Now, one rainy afternoon, Mateo and I were playing an extended game of hide-and-seek tag in his basement. The basement was really big, dimly lit and cluttered with boxes, old furniture and dusty sofas, sets, and all that sort of stuff. Perfect for a game like this. I was it, and had been searching for him for a few minutes when I finally spotted him darting across the far corner, trying to hide behind an old recliner. I ran after him, weaving around boxes and overturned chairs, until we reached the main open area where the TV and the two couches were set. Mateo ran around one couch and I went the other way, leaving the couch between us. And that was when I saw it. At first, I genuinely thought that it was just a trick of the light, but then it moved. A translucent figure appeared on the far wall, roughly human-shaped but taller and impossibly thin. It sprinted across the room at a speed that no child, adult, or even a human could manage, jumped cleanly over the couch that separated me from Mateo, and passed through the opposite wall like it wasn't even there. Its edges sort of shimmered, like smoke caught in sunlight, but the presence it gave off was tangible, heavy, cold, and impossible to ignore. I froze for a moment, not knowing what to say or do, before shouting, "I saw him! I saw Oliver!" Mateo laughed, brushing it off. "Oliver isn't real," he said. "He's imaginary." But I tried to explain over and over again, my words tumbling out in a panic. "No, I saw him run across the room. He jumped over the couch. He went through that wall." Mateo still laughed, though there was a faint unease in his smile now. After that incident, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was watching us in that basement. Shadows seemed longer than they should have been, corners darker, and even in the daytime the room just felt wrong. I tried telling my parents, but they all chalked it up to imagination. But I know that I wasn't imagining it. Weeks later too, while playing board games in the same basement, I glanced over at the corner where I'd first seen that figure, and for a fleeting moment, I swear that I saw it again, crouching and watching, seemingly just standing there or crouching there. I've never been able to describe the sense of being observed without seeing anyone physically there, but that's what this felt like. I'm 31 now. Mateo has no memory of ever seeing anything, and his childhood memory friend never manifested the way that mine or Oliver did. I've spent years questioning my own sanity, but I know what I saw. It was definitely something, not a child's fantasy, and it moved through the basement that day. Something that didn't belong to this world. When I was about 10, I used to spend summers at my grandfather's place in a small town in Vermont. A few houses down from his old Victorian duplex, there was a peculiar house that always seemed a bit off. It was neat, almost pristine, with polished windows and a small garden that looked untouched by time. A brother and a sister lived there, apparently, Eli and Naomi Hawthorne. They were impeccably dressed, quiet and polite to anyone that they met. On the surface, they seemed like perfect children. But everyone in the neighborhood knew the truth. Eli and Naomi, they never paid for anything. They would walk into shops, pick up candies or toys, smile politely at the shopkeepers, and just leave without paying. Nobody knew why, but after months of complaints, shopkeepers eventually stopped confronting them. One summer afternoon, the strangest thing happened though. The children called for a taxi, and I remember hearing from a neighbor that they had rushed inside in an odd, almost frantic manner, slamming the door behind them. The taxi driver waited outside, pounding on the door, pleading for his fare. He shouted, begged, even cursed under his breath, but nobody answered. The driver eventually left in defeat, and a few days later, a terrible stench began to drift through the neighborhood. At first, we thought that it was a dead animal, maybe a raccoon trapped in the thick underbrush behind the house or something. But when concerned neighbors finally forced their way inside, they found Eli and Naomi, and both children, well, they were gone, lying on the polished hardwood floors. Their faces were calm, almost unnaturally so, with no signs of struggle, no indication of what had caused their deaths. Doctors and authorities, they couldn't provide answers either. Some whispered that it might have been poisoning, others suspected some rare illness, but nothing was ever confirmed. That house, it remained empty ever since then too. Windows boarded, mail piling up in the mailbox, grass growing untended. But sometimes when my friends and I played in the street nearby, we would hear noises. Faint at first, and just creaks or whispers, but then more distinct. Sometimes it sounded like somebody was there or in the house. Occasionally, if you got too close to the fence while chasing a ball or something, then you would hear a soft voice and it would echo from inside, barely audible, but always repeating the same words over and over again. "Help me." At night, if the wind was just right, we could have sworn that we heard the front door creak open slightly, even though it was nailed shut. A neighbor once told me that they had seen shadows move behind the curtains at night, silhouettes of children standing perfectly still, staring out into the street. Some residents say, too, that if you walk past after midnight, then you can hear something breathing heavily, as if pacing right behind the front door. And the strange thing is, too, is that it's always synchronized with your footsteps, like something is following you, staying just out of sight, but it knows that you're there. Well, years later when I returned to visit my grandfather, I stopped by that house, and it had been listed for sale for decades, but no one had ever bought it. The air around it just felt heavy, thick, and almost suffocating, and I walked around the perimeter, and for a fleeting moment, I thought that I saw two figures at the top window, small, pale, staring silently at me, before they vanished, and I wasn't really sure what I saw. Even now, when I think back about those kids, the Hawthornes, I feel a bit of a cold dread settle in my chest. At that house, I don't know what was going on in there, but it isn't abandoned. It seems to be just sort of sitting there and, well, waiting for someone to notice that the silence inside isn't empty at all, that something lives there, something small, cold, and patient. And sometimes in the dead of the night, I have nightmares of that place. I still remember the whispers, the help me's, and the weird door sound. It's all very creepy and disturbing, and honestly, I really don't know what to make of it all. It was mid-December, and my family had decided to spend the holidays in a remote mountain cabin that my grandfather, a retired alpine ranger, had painstakingly restored over time. The cabin, it was tucked into a clearing deep into the Valdres Mountains of Norway, far from any road that received regular traffic. Snow blanketed the forest in thick layers, and the wind howled like wolves around the peaks. We had left a window cracked open to let the scent of the pine firewood circulate through the living room. The warmth was comforting, and the cabin smelled of roasted chestnuts and cinnamon from the holiday treats that my mother had prepared. Everything was normal until, well, it wasn't. A massive Norwegian elkhound, a dog that my grandfather kept on his property for guarding the area, suddenly burst through the window, crashing into the room as if it had seen the end of the world. Its fur bristled, eyes wide with pure terror, and it bolted behind the sofa, crouching low and whimpering. We all sort of laughed nervously, thinking that it had just been startled by a crow or something outside, but my grandfather said nothing. And after a tense moment, he walked into the adjoining room and returned carrying 2 old rifles and a box of ammunition. He didn't speak much, only handed me one of the rifles, motioned for me to load it, and attach the bayonet. "Stay alert," he said, his voice low. "If the dog's afraid, you need to understand why. This forest rarely frightens him like that." As we crouched near the window, he explained that these elkhounds were bred for survival in the brutal conditions, hunting in packs, guarding flocks from lynx, wolves, and bears, which meant that normally nothing in these mountains could scare them enough to behave like this. If they're terrified, then whatever is out there is something that you do not want to meet. After several minutes, we ventured outside, snow crunching under our boots. The dog led us to a trail in the snow, its fur still bristling, constantly turning its head as if it could sense something that we couldn't. We followed the tracks through a frozen clearing, the forest growing darker and denser around us as we went. Eventually, the path brought us to a narrow road illuminated by a single flickering lamppost. And that was when we saw it. A creature, at least 8 feet tall, stood in the road. Its body was grotesque but humanoid, but with sort of elongated limbs and jagged antlers like a twisted stag. Its skin was sort of mottled and stinking, its eyes glowing in an unnatural crimson that pierced the darkness. The smell of decay and iron just filled the air, and the snow around it seemed to melt slightly as it exhaled, steaming in the cold. My grandfather didn't wait and fired first. I aimed and squeezed the trigger as the shots rang out, but the creature didn't flinch. Bullets tore through its skin with no effect. It tilted its head and studied us as though we were nothing more than insects. Then it stepped backward, deliberately, disappearing into the shadows of the forest, still staring at us, its glowing eyes burning in the night. Well, we didn't speak on the walk back, each step crunching in the snow like a drumbeat in our chests. Inside the cabin, the dog cowered in the corner, still trembling. My grandfather sat by the fire, staring into the flames, silent for almost an hour. At night, I couldn't sleep. Every gust of wind against the cabin sounded like heavy footsteps. Every shadow outside seemed to twist unnaturally. I kept imagining red eyes watching me from the forest. My grandfather, he didn't say a word about what we saw, only muttering occasionally about things in the mountains that no one should ever encounter. We told no one else about it, in fact. When friends asked about what had scared the dog so badly, we only said that it must have been a bear or some large wild animal. But I have never forgotten the way that those crimson eyes followed us, the smell of decay in the air like that, or even the slow, deliberate manner in which it retreated into the forest like that, almost as though it was warning us that it could have ended us in a heartbeat. Even now, all those years later, any time that I enter a snowy forest, I can never forget that night and what I saw. I've always been fascinated by what other people remember from their childhoods, especially when it comes to things that don't make any sense. And so I thought that I would share my own experience, though it is a bit of a long one. So, I had a relatively ordinary childhood until my family moved into a house when I was about to turn 6. The home had been built in the 1920s, but had recently been extensively renovated. On the surface, it looked pristine. White walls, new hardwood floors, and modern fixtures. But parts of the old structure were left intact, like the living room, part of the dining area, a small TV room that we jokingly called the attic annex, and my bedroom, which had been an addition to the house later on. Now, even during the day, the house always felt a little bit off, I would say. There was a sort of heaviness to the air that you couldn't explain. The living room with its enormous mirrored wall always seemed darker than it should be, and at night, that darkness, it grew oppressive. It was impossible to shake the feeling that someone or something was watching, and often I would run from one room to another after sundown just to escape the sensation, even though nobody else was around. It all started on the second week that we were there, though. My dad was away for work, and my mum was upstairs in the guest bedroom. I was sitting alone on a small love seat near the dining area watching a VHS of the Goonies. The flickering glow of the TV cast shadows across the walls, and that was when I heard it. A sort of faint metallic creak, like the spring in a doorknob being twisted. I looked across the room, and I saw the doorknob of the attic annex slowly moving up and down by itself. My legs froze. My mind screamed intruder, but there was no one there. When the movement stopped, I bolted upstairs and told my mum. She called the police, but when they arrived, there was no sign of forced entry, nothing at all. That night, I dreamed of a pale, ghostly face staring at me through the large picture window of that same room. Its hollow eyes are burned into my memory even now because it was a terrifying nightmare. Almost immediately after moving in, too, I developed insomnia. I would lie awake night after night, staring into the shadows and seeing shapes that flickered and moved, just out of clear view, of course. Friends who came over would comment on the oppressive feeling too, and some reported sudden drops in temperature even, as though icy fingers were brushing their skin. Footsteps seemed to shuffle down the wooden hallways when nobody was moving. It was all subtle at first, but over months it became truly undeniable. Like one night, my mum screamed from her bedroom. My dad was in the garage working on a project, and she yelled at him asking if he had come into her room. She described seeing a tall figure wearing a long, flowing white gown standing at the foot of her bed. It apparently had no feet and just hovered slightly above the floor. When she turned to confront it, it disappeared, vanished into her walk-in closet, is what she said. But nobody was there, and yet I really don't think that she was imagining it. As I got older, the events escalated too. Our dog, normally calm, would bark ferociously at empty corners. My parents' arguments became more frequent. The house seemed to weigh on everyone's mood. The home looked perfect from the outside, but inside it just radiated unease. By the time that I was 10, I started to use the house's natural creepiness to scare my friends sometimes. I would sneak away in the dark and watch them panic, giggling to myself in the shadows, but I had no idea just how real that danger truly was. At least, not until later. When I was 12, I took it too far. My friend Lily and I were in the kitchen getting a snack. I turned and ran as fast as I could down the hallway, thinking that this would be another harmless scare, and that was when it happened. A metal wine rack flew off the counter, spinning through the air directly where I'd just been standing. I jumped aside just in time, heart pounding, and it clattered to the floor 10 feet away. Lily froze, her face pale, unable to speak. I still remember that sensation too. The air around me felt staticky all of a sudden, almost alive, and for a brief moment I could have sworn that I felt someone behind me, someone that had deliberately moved that object. And well, that night, we both ran to my room and locked the door, and we refused to go back out there. Even now, years later, I remember that house vividly. The dark corners, the mirrored walls, the cold drafts that seemed to come from nowhere, and the sense that something was always watching you. I don't know if it was a spirit, a residual energy, or maybe it was something else entirely, maybe demonic, who knows. But whatever it was, it made my childhood unforgettable in a way that it's hard to explain. I've always loved the woods. Growing up in northern New Hampshire, I was far more comfortable among trees and streams than I ever was in the city. I spent most of my childhood hiking and camping, often alone, learning to read the forest like a book. And a few years back, my dad, recently retired, decided to hike a part of the Long Trail. When he came to New Hampshire, he encouraged me and my younger brother Alex to join him on some shorter overnight treks, and I decided to join him for a night hike across Mount Kittery, a ridge deep in the White Mountains. If you're not familiar with the Silverpine corridor, it's an area with a history of strange disappearances and folklore. The locals say that the woods near Mount Kittery have always been a bit odd. People have vanished here over the decades, and one story tells of a young hiker in the 1950s who never returned from a solo climb. A few years later, too, a local farmer's child vanished while playing near the base of the mountain, and even recently a hiker went missing near a stream after separating from a friend. There's also a bit of a weird common thread. Apparently, each of the lost people wore red, and each was last seen alone in the woods. Well, knowing the stories, I decided to test my superstition a bit, and I wore a bright neon pink jacket, pants, and a hat. And I mean, if anything was going to notice me, then it might as well be fully aware that I was there. The hike itself was peaceful, though. The weather was cool and clear, and the trail well marked, the forest alive with the scent of pine and damp earth. We reached a small lean-to about 8 miles in, a structure tucked under a gentle slope near a bubbling brook. Down the hill from it was a small rustic outhouse, and the stream ran a few hundred feet beyond that. That evening, 2 other hikers arrived, a middle-aged couple traveling together, and we shared the lean-to. A 5th hiker showed up later, but pitched a tent closer to the stream, apart from the group. The 4 of us ate a modest dinner, exchanging stories and settling in for the night. Eventually, I fell asleep pretty quickly in the corner of the lean-to, and it must have been around midnight when I woke up needing to pee, and I considered the outhouse but decided that it was too far in the dark. Instead, I slipped off the edge of the lean-to and ducked behind some thick brush beside it. And it was when I got there that the hair on the back of my neck suddenly stood up. I felt it immediately. Something massive, close and watching me. a low rattling breathing sound coming from the other side of a bush. Now, I've been close to bears before, and this was different. Bears generally avoid humans, and our food was stored safely. Whatever was there, it didn't want me near it too. I froze, too scared to look, and the brush trembled slightly as if whatever it was shifted, massive and patient, waiting. I instantly stumbled back into the lean-to, heart hammering, and sat as still as I could. Then came a sound, something brushing against the edge of the wooden structure, and then silence. For a moment, the forest itself seemed to hold its breath, and eventually, after some time and I calmed myself down a bit, I managed to fall asleep, though I woke repeatedly, feeling the same presence that seemingly had never left. Morning arrived with an eerie stillness that day. What I mean is that not a bird sang, and there was no squirrel stirring or anything. Even the wind seemed muted. Well, we packed up, and as we followed the trail down the ridge, I noticed the strange quiet persisted the entire 10-mile descent. The stream gurgled softly, leaves rustled faintly, and yet it all just sounded muted and hollow almost. Even the other hikers seemed affected by this, glancing nervously at the shadows among the trees. I've never been entirely sure what was near me that night behind that bush. A bear? Maybe. Something supernatural? Possibly, but the experience, whatever it was, changed my perspective for sure. That corridor isn't just folklore fodder. There's a weight to those woods, and a presence that makes you feel observed, measured, and perhaps even a little bit judged, I would say. All I can say too is that I'm grateful that I didn't dress in red that night. The stories say that those who vanished, that they were last seen in red, and after what I felt, I'm definitely not eager to test it. I work in a small mountain resort made of semi-private cabins. There's about 30 cabins in all, spaced out enough to feel like you're alone in the mountains. I've had paranormal experiences in 2 of the cabins at this point, and while it's nothing super crazy, yesterday left me feeling really spooked. This experience takes place in cabin number 30. So, about 3 weeks ago, I was deep cleaning cabin 30. I was in this cabin for my entire shift. I was listening to a funny show on low volume, and over my earphones I heard what sounded like someone walking on the front deck. I opened the door, and when I did, nothing was there. Keep in mind too that I've worked here for a while now and can recognize any normal noises versus when someone is coming to the door. I chalked it up to my show, and so I just continued cleaning. I unplugged a nearby lamp, wrapped a cord around it, and put it securely onto a table. I walked across the cabin and then turned back towards the lamp to see the lamp cord unraveled and swinging off the side of the table. Not a gentle swing as if it had unraveled somehow, but like fully swinging with force. I froze for a second because I made sure that it was in the center of the table, secured. I really don't know how it could have slipped off and started swinging the way that it was. Nothing else happened for the remainder of the day, but that certainly left me pretty unsettled. Cut to yesterday though, and I'm back in cabin 30 doing a regular clean. Again, I'm listening to a show, completely forgot about the experience from the last time I cleaned the cabin. I'm wiping down the kitchen when I sort of catch movement from my peripherals, so I turned around, but there was nothing there. I'm thinking that it must have been a fly or something. I really don't know, but I turn back towards the kitchen and start getting a very eerie feeling all of a sudden, like I'm being watched. I'm a bit of a veteran in the feeling of being watched, unfortunately. I lived in a very haunted house growing up, another story for another time, but there's a light on the ceiling a little behind where I'm standing, and as I'm trying to ignore the feeling, suddenly a large shadow is cast next to me from the kitchen light onto the counter to the left of me. I can tell you that I whipped around so fast, thinking that someone came in, and I just didn't hear them due to my earphones, only to find the cabin completely empty. I was really startled by that. My heart was racing, and I once again just froze because, what the heck, right? The shadow, though, was clear as day, cast directly next to me. I genuinely thought that a maintenance worker had come into the room or something like that, but I can assure you that it was just me. I left the room to get some fresh air, where I proceeded to have a bit of a mini freak out. I had to finish the cabin that day as someone was checking in, so I went back in and just said out loud, "I'm just here to clean and I'm almost done. Please just let me finish without any issues." Did I feel insane? Well, yes. Did anything else happen? No, but I sped the rest of the way through and I got out of there. Now, when I go back in tomorrow, I've gotten permission from my manager to sage the cabin. And if you have any advice on how I should cleanse whatever bad juju is in there for my mental well-being, well, I'm all ears. I've never done a sage cleanse, but I will refuse to go back in there if I don't. I will be doing this, and I really, really hope it works. To start things off, I don't really believe in angels or demons or God and the devil, but I do believe that there is dark entities that exist out there. What they are, I really don't know, but I believe that there's something. When I was growing up, my family moved into a suburban neighborhood in Pennsylvania, and as my parents' first house, it was a decent-sized and beautiful place. I had 3 siblings at the time when we moved in, me being the oldest. I was around the age of maybe 5 or 6 at the time. But fast forward to around the age of 8 to 9, when I have the most vivid memories of the occurrences that I would always see glowing red eyes in the shadows of my closet. This, as well as my younger sister as well, who also would see and scream, crying to our parents, rats with red eyes. They shrugged it off as children with a wild imagination, typical monsters under the bed deal. At some point, though, I would complain that I would have heard my name being called, but it was by an unfamiliar voice. My sister would say the same thing, too. We both slept in the upper level of the house. It was 2 floors with a half-finished basement. My parents were obviously concerned, but they shrugged it off for the time being. Eventually, my mother began to experience similar things, though, and started to believe us. Her being a Christian, she spoke with our pastor, who told us to cleanse the house, in which we recited a prayer and drew a cross in an olive oil on the wall. This only made things worse, though. The red eyes and the voices continued, accompanied by shade figures out of the corner of my eye, and at night, both my sister and I would shriek at these things and hide under the covers, begging for it to go away. Sometimes our parents would come up and turn on the lights to see the commotion and all that, and they would see that nothing was there. Sometimes things would fall too, move or shake on its own. Lights would shut off without an explanation, doors would slam, chairs moved, the whole shebang of ghostly stuff that you see on TV. My mother, being a paranormal believer, always tried to comfort us and give us the benefit of the doubt. My father, however, was a huge skeptic, until one night when I came down crying about the monster sitting on the steps to the basement, being told that it was okay, that there's no monster, when suddenly the door slammed closed, and I felt a push throwing me down the steps of the basement. Absolutely traumatized, by the way, by that. My mother rushed to open the door and dragged me out of there, and I slept in her room while she said some prayers. This continued to go on for a few years, my parents constantly trying to cleanse the house, even having a pastor at our church come and do it, but it would always continue and just get worse. There would be cold spots and more intense activity there. I was home alone one day when I was about 12, I would guess, in our basement where the computer was set up. There was nobody there and no windows open or anything, when all of a sudden the shelves down there were forcefully pushed over, crashing down right next to me. I ran and waited outside until my parents came home, terrified of what was in that house. Events like this occurred regularly. My dogs would bark, I would see shadows, hear things, and my family experienced the same things. However, my sister and I definitely got the worst of it. It got to the point when I was old enough to sort of comprehend it that I would read Bible verses and rebuke the demon in order to fend it off or get the heck out of there. It never really worked, mind you. Another occurrence I vividly remember that shook me though to the core was I was watching a big shadowy sort of figure across the room to my sister's bed hover over her bed in a TV-lit room. I think it noticed me waking up in a sweat, and it must have noticed me staring at it, looked back, and I sat there in shock, eventually hiding under the blanket. I could hear it breathing, and I felt pressure of its presence over my body all of a sudden. I eventually must have passed out from fear or fallen asleep or something, because that's the last thing that I remember. When I was around 14, though, my cousin's caretakers, my grandmother and grandpa, had both fallen ill, and my grandmother passed away shortly after this. The three of them had come to live with us, and the events continued, and they noticed it too. We were all terrified of that basement and the upstairs level as well, where things occurred the most. There would be nights where all of us would sort of huddle in one room, laying closely, listening to things move and noises while nobody was there to be making them. The pastor came again, and sometime around then did the same old, and surprisingly it got better for a bit. But I believe that my dysfunctional family and negative events drew it back out, and they continued. Things went south for a while, and my parents got a divorce. My mother got into drugs and whatnot, and we eventually moved to a town home with my father, but even as we were moving and leaving that house, it was always creepy. To this day, I've had lifelong trauma, and I'm still uncomfortable in the pitch black. I don't like attics or unfinished basements, and I do believe that there was something in that house. I never really get to talk about this much except for with my sister, so I appreciate you guys listening to it. I wanted to share my experiences, and, well, I hope that you guys have a good day. So, to start, I want to say that although I've had, I think, some paranormal activity in my life, I try to be logical about it when it comes to experiences like this. I would say 99 times out of 100, there's a reasonable explanation for the weird things that happen. But lately, it's just been, well, strange. Some backstory to start, though. My husband has had tinnitus for years now. Some days are good, but mostly bad, and one day he said that he felt like he was going schizo, and I chalked it up to him going crazy with the ringing in his ears, and that reality was getting harder for him to deal with. I comforted him, but didn't ask too many questions. Sometimes he just wants to vent and not answer 100 questions. So fast forward to me sitting in bed a couple of weeks ago, and in the doorway I see what looks like part of a head poke around the corner, peering into the room, then quickly jerk back into the hall. I knew that nobody was upstairs, but I got up, saw my husband downstairs on the couch, and asked if he was just upstairs. He replied no, and I said, well, I just saw what looked like someone peering into the room at the corner of my eye. I joked about shadow people because at this point with living in our house, it's kind of been an on and off occurrence. I'm honestly not even really that fazed by it, more fascinated if anything. But he said, you know, it's weird because I felt like I've been going literally crazy. I've been seeing stuff like that a lot recently. We both were a little bit weirded out by that, but oh well at this point. Then a week ago, he was in bed and he saw something move at the corner of our bed, then suddenly disappear. Another weird occurrence I experienced was right before I saw the head in my doorway. I had a sort of strange sleep paralysis moment. I was laying in bed vibing with this sort of odd energetic flow, not realizing that I was asleep while my husband was laying to the left of me, when all of a sudden, a hand slid onto my stomach from the right side. I freaked out, screaming in my dream for help, and finally woke up. My husband was asleep and the weight of the sleep paralysis lifted, but sometimes when I wake up from that state, my brain feels sort of full, like it's still working out of the sleep chemicals and I haven't regained full alertness yet. It's very odd, but during this state I can see things move that aren't there. So I look and there's a shadowy sort of figure on top of him. I thought it was him moving his legs in the dark, but then I realized that it wasn't. As soon as I realized that it wasn't, I noticed this thing was holding something that looked like a phone screen almost. It was just a rectangular sort of white light. I told myself that I must still be in a dreamlike state because of the way that my head felt. I put the covers over me and tried to relax until I was more awake and with it. Then I looked at my husband's side of the bed again where his legs were, and whatever it was, it had vanished. I told myself that it must have been the moonlight even though my curtains were fully closed. Again, I'm so used to weird stuff that I'm just not even afraid of it anymore. Just really interested in what is actually going on, whether it's some scientific phenomenon or something actually paranormal. But then today, I got weirded out by something out of the blue. You see, I was working the lunchroom at my kids' school, and at the table where my kids sat last week, in the exact same spot, there was a sort of small Tupperware container missing a lid. Last week she lost this piece and only had the lid, and I noticed the missing Tupperware right away because, well, OCD I guess, and I couldn't find it anywhere. But here it was today, right where she sat. Today, that side of the table was empty with other kids sitting on the opposite end, and I was like, oh, someone probably picked it up and just put it there. But it was weird that it was exactly where she was sitting. Then, a little while later, one of the kids sitting at the other end of this table was very distraught all of a sudden. She had one strawberry left in her lunch and she got up, came back, and it was gone. I said, well, maybe you ate it and just forgot about it, or it fell or something. But she swore up and down that she had one left and someone must have taken it. I was like, well, we're going to have to let that one go, because if no one comes forward, we can't accuse people of taking it. I know that this is very off topic from the shadow people, but I definitely had some intrusive thoughts of maybe things are disappearing into another time or something. I even thought, is this table some weird time-jumping portal, victimizing Tupperware and strawberries? I know, ridiculous, but that just can't be right, and it's just a case of kids being kids, right? And misplacing or taking stuff. But with all the incredibly weird stuff happening lately, I just cannot help that my brain is going to crazy places of thought. But if a lone strawberry magically reappears in that spot next week, well, it will be the end of my sanity for sure. I was also wondering if anyone else has been experiencing occurrences that seem strange like this, and out of the ordinary. I swear too that I really am a logical person and don't like giving too much weight to the paranormal like this, especially when there's most likely a logical explanation. But for whatever reason, the air just feels different all of a sudden. I also really enjoy hearing about unexplainable things from other people, so if you have anything to share, then I would love to hear it. I don't usually share stuff like this, but genuinely I'm freaking out a bit and I could really use some advice. So something really strange has been happening the last few nights. I've been too scared to tell anyone, but I feel like I have to now. It started 2 nights ago. I was lying in bed trying to sleep when I heard this sort of soft tapping noise. At first I thought it was just the wind or maybe a tree branch. but then it came again. 3 taps. It was coming from my window. I live in a 1-story house, so it's not that high up, but it's weird because really there's nothing outside of my window except our backyard and a tall fence. I tried to ignore it, but the tapping didn't stop. I finally worked up the courage to get out of bed and peek through the blinds, and that was when I saw him. There was a man standing outside, just staring at my window. He was tall with a pale face that looked almost empty, like there was nothing behind his eyes. He didn't move and he just kept staring at me. I panicked and ducked down. My heart was racing and I didn't know what to do. After a moment, I finally crawled back into bed and pulled the covers over my head, but I didn't sleep that night. The next day, when the sun rose, I tried to convince myself that it was just my imagination, or maybe it was just a dream or something. But last night, it happened again. The same soft tapping, the same man outside of my window. This time I didn't even look though. I just froze, hoping that he would go away. I told my parents about it this morning, but they didn't believe me. They think I'm just having nightmares or something to that effect, and they told me to stop watching scary movies before bed, but I know what I saw. Tonight, I'm scared to go to sleep. I mean, what if he comes back? What if he tries to get in? I've checked the window multiple times to make sure that it's locked, but I feel like it's just not enough. And so I really don't know what to do. Should I be calling the police or something? I'm scared and I just need someone to believe me, so please do believe me that this is happening, and I really, really could use your advice. When I was about 7 to 8 years old, I lived near a woods called Lilford Woods, and me and my brothers and friends played there many times. We used to make rope swings from trees that were at the side of a World War II bomb crater, but one day, me and my older brother, and my best friend at the time, we were there as usual at one weekend, and this particular day, we could hear a flute playing music, and it seemed to be coming from sort of all around us. We searched all over to find the source, but we ended up giving up when it eventually stopped, and we decided to head home as it was close for us to be home time for tea anyway. So we started to head home, and then the music started again, but again we just couldn't determine its source. We made it to the edge of the woods and had to climb a small fence that opened up to a large field, and in the middle of that field, we could see a man sat cross-legged playing the flute. We approached him and told him that we could hear him from miles away. From my first impression, he looked out of place. His clothes didn't match the era, which at the time would have been the late 80s. He looked like he was from the 70s or the 60s maybe. His clothes didn't look like anything that you would see anybody wearing at the time. We asked him if he could play any other instruments, and he said that he could play the guitar. We asked him if he could play any songs that we knew at the time, which was like George Michael, but he said that he had never heard of him. We asked some other questions, but my older brother said that it was time for us to go home. We all started running across the field, which led to a tree line which we had to go through that led us to the dirt road again. It took us no more than 30 seconds to get there, but then as we were running down the dirt road, we could hear the flute playing again, and as we're still running, we looked to our left back towards where the man was. We could see him sort of running parallel to us on the field, but through the tree line. Then, as we're still running, we looked away from him to look forward, which would have been milliseconds at most. And about 100 meters away, we saw him jumping down a sewerage manhole. It took us about 20 seconds to reach it, and when we got there, there was no cover over the manhole, and all we could see was rushing water. But the hole seemed too small for a man to even fit through. We all thought that it was weird, but at the time we were young and naive and thought older people were just stronger and faster than us and could do things that kids couldn't. The following Monday, we all went to school and we were telling friends about what we had witnessed, and a lunch lady overheard us and asked us to describe him. And she also asked us if we had made the story up, and obviously we said no. And she told us that he fits the description of a 23-year-old man that unfortunately had ended his own life in the woods in the 70s. When I think back, I remember his neck looked very red and sore too. And if you understand what I'm saying, well, that's the way that he ended it. We never did hear or see anything again after that. I'm 43, so is my friend, and my older brother is 45, and we all remember it the same way. My older brother is certainly the sort of guy that believes in facts and figures and what you can see, and even he can only explain all of it as supernatural. About 4 years ago, my husband and I moved into our current house. For the first few months, we had a roommate, and while she was here, we didn't notice anything weird. But over the past 3 years, we've been noticing more and more things. Like, I'll be home alone at times and will see things out of the corner of my eye. What I usually see the most is if the bathroom door is open and I'm looking in the mirror, I will see a lady standing in the kitchen. That doesn't really scare me since I've lived in a few different places that have been haunted and I've dealt with quite a few paranormal things. In the past year though, it's gotten worse. My husband has started sleepwalking, even though he never has in the past. Our dog will be barking at things that aren't there and I can't find anything that he would usually bark at. He doesn't usually bark unless someone he doesn't know comes over. I have multiple times woken up with scratches, which could be me scratching myself, I admit, in my sleep, but that never happened before living here, so it's a bit odd. We hear whispering and footsteps outside of our bedroom door at night. Our dog has also recently started having seizures, which the only explanation the vet has had for that is that it could be anxiety related. Now, I've dealt with some pretty intense hauntings, but nothing quite like this. I've tried cleansing the house multiple times, and every time it calms down temporarily, but it never sticks. And I don't just mean just sage. I have tried countless types of herbs, candles, crystals, incenses, moon water, salt around the house, and even having other people come over who know how to deal with spirits. What I'm trying to say is that I'm certainly not a beginner on this type of stuff. In fact, a lot of people have come to me for help with anything like this in the past. We live in the basement of a house, and we have had multiple upstairs neighbors since we moved in, and each one has separately said that they have noticed things too. When we first moved in, our landlord mentioned that the previous tenants left after about a month of living here with no notice and no explanation. A few months after we moved in, right after our old roommate moved out, they were doing renovations upstairs and found a petrified cat under the floorboards. We have had different people come over to hang out, and multiple people have seen something standing in the same corner. We don't mention that the house is haunted, and anyone who comes over says that they saw something. Even my best friend, who didn't believe in ghosts before this place, said that he saw something standing in the corner. I always feel like I'm being watched too, even when nobody else is in the house. I am very receptive of energy and sense that whatever is here is malevolent, but I've been able to create at least a bit of a barrier between us, I think. I would usually know what to do in the case of a normal haunting and have successfully cleansed multiple places before, but this is way beyond my expertise. So that's why I'm here. If you have any advice, it would be greatly appreciated. I also don't know if this is related at all, but I have an antique music box from Japan that I've had since I was a kid. When I got it, I didn't notice anything off about it, but when I started to pick up on energy, I realized that there is something attached to it, I think. I have tried to get rid of it multiple times, like throw it out and all that, but every time that I try to get rid of it, it always ends up somewhere that I end up finding it again. The song is extremely out of tune at this point. It wasn't when I got it, obviously, and it will sometimes play on its own still, even if the box is closed, even if it's been years since I wound it up. I don't know if it's just adding more to what's already going on here or if it's connected somehow, but I thought that I should mention it. Like I said, I've dealt with a lot of things, but this is all new for me. I'm willing to try anything at this point, really. I feel it follows me out of the house as well, and even one of my co-workers has told me that something has been following me. I try my best not to be scared, since that usually gives entities more power, but I always just feel a bit on edge now, and that certainly cannot be good. For about 10 years, my family of 5 rented a house that we just never felt was quite right. It was my wife and I, and our son and 2 daughters. The house, it shared land with a trailer park, and my kids made friends with a lot of the kids in the area. That's important for later as well, but over that time, the kids would talk about some things that they'd experienced. They had lots of dreams that took place in the house, apparently. Mostly the dreams were frightening as well, but sometimes they were warnings, they said. Now, one morning, before heading to school, my oldest told me about the nightmare that he'd had the night before. Then, when my middle woke up, she told me about the nightmare that she'd had the night before. After school, I told them both that they had experienced a shared dream because they both had told me the exact same nightmare. Once my youngest had her leg pulled while sleeping, but thought that her big sister was just messing with her, until the following morning when she asked her about it. Things in the house would sometimes move or shake, but almost always just on the edge of vision, and we always tried to explain it away as just seeing things. The kids, they would sometimes see a shadow person wearing a tall hat in their periphery, but they also insisted that there was something masquerading as a little girl, but they weren't sure if it was the same entity taking multiple shapes. We bought a house in early 2021, maybe about half an hour away from the old place, and we eventually moved out. Over the next few weeks, the kids, at that time they were 18, 16, and 14, finally felt safe, and they opened up to my wife and I about all of the things that they had experienced there. There was a lot that they didn't talk about while we lived there, and many more details shared about some of the things that I had mentioned above. It was now all out in the open, and hearing all 3 of them talk about things definitely made me a bit of a believer. But now they were just spooky stories, and all of it was in our past. Or so I thought, at least. You see, last night my oldest had a dream. They were talking to their sister or middle kid in our current house. They were just chatting, and she told him that she had to get some homework done, so my son said goodnight and headed to their room. They closed the door and their current room was gone, and they found themselves in their old bedroom and were immediately uneasy as the dream turned into a nightmare. It ended when one of our current cats, never lived at that old place by the way, scared them out of their dream by jumping out of their bedroom closet, which had always been a bit of a hot spot back in the day. He went to the closet door and slammed it shut, and immediately there were 3 hard knocks on the door from the inside. He apparently manifested a lock for the door in the dream, locked it, and woke up. It was just after midnight, and he told me about it immediately. He was visibly shaken and teary-eyed as he told me about it, but felt better after getting it out. I, though, got shivers as they told it, but told myself that I could just chalk it up to residual trauma from the old house or something. But then, this afternoon, he mentioned it to his sister, and they started talking about the old house a bit. She mentioned that she was at a Halloween bonfire a few weeks ago with friends, and found out that one of her friends is very close with the family that recently moved into that old house. Either the 3rd or 4th family that has lived there since we left, by the way. That friend told her at the bonfire, though, that the family had just had a cleansing or exorcism done on the house after the mum started seeing a shadow man in a top hat. The timing definitely worries me. That exorcism would have happened about a month ago, and now my oldest is dreaming of the place. I have heard that things can latch onto you when you leave a place, but it's been almost 4 years and there just was nothing. I've asked my daughter to get the name of whoever did the work at the old house, and we may actually have a cleansing of our own in the future. I guess I'm just worried that the cleansing just sort of kicked it out of the old place and freed it up to find its way to get back to us. I have no personal experience with cleansings, only what I've seen on TV or in movies really, and so that's why I'm here. Is this possible, or is it just a coincidence, and if it isn't, should we do some sort of cleansing event? This happened a long time ago now, but I remember when I was younger I had a walkie-talkie that my grandma got me for my birthday at one point. And well, one night, I'm assuming someone wanted to mess with me, but out of nowhere I heard someone begging and crying for help on that radio. It was probably the scariest experience that I'd ever felt as a kid. Now, either someone found my radio channel and decided to mess with me, or someone legitimately needed help, and young me clearly didn't know what to do in that situation. It definitely felt off, and I have had odd experiences in my old house when I was younger. Like, I remember sometimes I heard my mum calling my name, but nobody being there. That was probably one of the scarier experiences that I've ever experienced up there with the walkie-talkie, but I have had vivid nightmares to which I could feel things happening to me. And this could be chalked up to an overactive imagination, I know that, but I had this problem with sleeping in my parents' room because I was scared to be alone all the time. But every time that I would walk to my parents' room, in multiple corners there were shapes of like dogs staring at me. Now, the last experience I remember having is when I was sitting on a bed. From what I can remember of that time, I think I was sitting on my bed and I looked up at something, but as soon as I looked up at it, I felt something hit my face and I was physically pushed down. Weirdly though, as soon as I reached a certain age, I remembered it all just sort of stopped suddenly. No nightmares, seeing things in the dark, hearing voices, or having any sort of experience whatsoever. I don't know if this can all be chalked up to just normal overactive child imaginations, or if it is something more. I wish that I had proof, and I don't blame you if you don't believe me, but this just suddenly came to my mind and I wanted to archive it somewhere while I still remembered it. I also wanted to share my experiences to see if anyone else has had anything similar happen to them. This was my first time that I would say that I ever experienced anything remotely paranormal in my life that lasted for a long time and wasn't just some one-off sound or seeing something move. As you can probably tell, I'm generally a skeptic about these things and I look for a rational explanation in anything, even though I definitely want to be proven wrong. Now this happened late at night. Definitely a few hours after midnight at least. I was having trouble sleeping around this time in my life for one reason or another, but it wasn't uncommon for me to be fully awake in regular intervals throughout the night. I remember that I needed to get up to go to the bathroom, but the whole house was pitch black and everybody was asleep. The door to my room creaks like crazy and is very loud when you shut it even normally. So to avoid disturbing my family, I was very careful to slowly unlatch it so as to not make any noise, crack the door slowly, and when I returned, make sure the door shut before I release the knob slowly to not make a large click or a sound. I laid back down in bed, still unfortunately wide awake, just trying to make myself tired. Then something weird happened. I heard my doorknob slowly turn and unlatch the same way that I had done a couple of minutes before, and the door cracked open about an inch. My bed was only a couple of feet from the door, so I watched it open, wide awake. No one was behind the door when it opened, though. I half expected my dad to peek in and ask if I was okay since I was still awake, but no. At this point, I was getting a little bit spooked. I was sure that I had closed and latched the door since I was so intentional about not making any noise. I laid there for a good while, maybe 4 or 5 minutes before I reached over and just shut the door, not caring about any noise anymore. It was shut this time for sure as well, and it closed loudly, so I knew. A few minutes later, as I'm trying to fall asleep, I start to hear something else. Down the hallway, I can hear footsteps coming up the stairs. The cadence was slow, but I could hear each stair. I perked up to listen, and the weirdest thing happened. The steps seemed to start over as I started to pay attention. This happened a couple of times too, where the footsteps would reach almost the top of the stairs and then start over at the bottom. I know that they were starting over since a couple of the stairs at the bottom have a distinctive creaking unlike the upper ones. I was obviously very confused listening to this over and over, and I tried to lay down and ignore it. But then the steps stopped starting over and over, and this time when they reached the top of the stairs, they came down the hall and stopped just outside of my door. I remember, in the dead silence too, I heard the faint sound of feet settling into the carpet. That was when the breathing started too. It was light at first and progressively got heavier and more labored. Deep breaths turned to gasping breaths, which evolved into crackling and raspy inhales, almost like that of a lifelong smoker. It sounded like someone was right outside of my door, and for some reason just standing there breathing. At the time, this felt like it had lasted half an hour at least, when it maybe only lasted a couple of minutes. At this point, I'm laying down stiff as a board, trying to look at anything but the door. My heart was beating out of my chest, and then, finally, it stopped. But not before whatever was standing out there let out what sounded like a raspy chuckle. You could probably chalk all this up to a lack of sleep and an overactive imagination at the time, I know that. But all I can say is that, in now 24 years, I have never had anything similar like this happen to me ever again. And having the same sleep problems regularly since middle school, I still get chills thinking about that night. I wonder if anybody else has had anything similar happen to them, because if you have, then I feel deeply sorry for you. It's something that I wouldn't wish on anyone, and it's a very, very frightening experience to go through, and something that never leaves you. This happened when I was about 7 years old. I never really gave this much thought until recently when my mother reminded me that it happened, and how we never really were able to explain it. You see, I was in summer school, and during one recess, I was playing on the playground with this girl that I had become close to. Usually, when recess was over, a loud bell would ring to signal that it was time to go back to class. On this particular day, the girl and I were lost in our own little world of make-believe. We didn't hear the bell ring, and eventually we noticed that we were alone on the playground. The weird thing is that there were yard duties on site, so an adult would corral the kids if they didn't immediately respond to the bell. But that day, there was no adult to tell us to go back inside. No kids crawling on the monkey bars with us. It was just empty. It really felt like the playground had only just vacated after a few minutes, so we figured that we wouldn't get into huge trouble if we made our way back to the classroom. Upon entering the classroom, the teacher immediately yells out, "Where have you girls been? We've been looking for you." It turns out that 2 hours had passed from the time that the bell rang to when we reappeared. We got yelled at for disappearing, but as a child, I never understood why I was in trouble. I mean, I never left the playground, so why was I getting yelled at? Looking back on it, I have to wonder, did we disappear? Does this count as missing time? It really felt like to us that we had taken our recess as normal and nothing weird had happened. The creepy thing though is that both that girl I was playing with and I experienced the same thing too. So there's just no way that this is a hallucination coming from my brain alone. I kind of just shook it off as one of those guess we'll never know things, but now that I'm older, it really is one of the weirdest things that I've ever experienced. I'm really curious too as to what may have happened during that time. Did we get abducted by aliens, hence the missing time? Did we accidentally slip into a different dimension? Were the Fae trying to kidnap us or something? When we realized we were alone, it was totally the Oz effect. No noise, just eerie silence. Anyway, I'm not sure why I'm sharing this other than to say something that might resonate with someone. I've always been curious to see if anything similar has happened to anyone else because I cannot be the only one that this has happened to. A few years ago, my husband and I found a 3-bedroom bungalow that was cheap to rent. The owner who inherited it, it was a friend of my husband. This guy's father had passed away the previous year, and the house was sitting empty that whole time. The owner didn't want to live in it, and he didn't even bother returning to the house to remove all the furniture, clothing, or belongings from it either. I didn't even get a chance to see the place before, well, we moved in. My husband sprung it on me last minute after our apartment lease was up. It looked okay from the outside, I guess. The windows were dark, but of course no one lived there, so that was normal. Once my husband opened the door and switched on the light in the foyer, I felt that this place wasn't empty. I felt like something was in there, watching us right away. I knew that the original owner had passed away, so I just figured that I was just spooking myself that first evening. The whole house, though, was full of furniture, knickknacks, personal items, clothing, and it was dark and dusty. I was depressed just looking at it all. The part of the deal for the cheap rent, though, is that we had to clean it all. So we got a truck and cleaned out the majority of the house. We kept some things like the almost new couch, armchairs, TV, and end tables. We kept the master bedroom furniture in there because the mattress was new. The bedding and the furniture were new as well, and it hadn't been used yet. My husband, he traveled for work at the time. He left me there alone, and that is when I experienced things that were, well, for a lack of a better term, odd. That feeling of being observed, it didn't go away. I stayed in the front rooms because there was better light there, and it's where our belongings were too. The back part of the bungalow was just always dark though. The first thing that I noticed was scratching sounds in the wall. It's Texas, so it could have been an animal doing that, I admit it. But I heard what sounded like walking along the ceiling too. I remembered one day I was watching a movie. There was this loud stomping up there. I was distractedly thinking to myself, damn, the neighbors are loud. But then I remembered that there wasn't any upstairs neighbors. I ran outside to see what was on the roof, but nothing. But it really sounded like heavy footsteps crossing from one side of the house to the other. Well, I was also nocturnal back then, and I stayed up all night either watching live streams or painting in the living room. I was in my bedroom watching an old black and white movie on TV this particular night. Outside, I could see the pink dawn coming through the curtains, and that's when I heard the knocking. Just 2 sharp knocks in the upper left-hand side of my bedroom wall, over the bed. The bedroom was at the left corner side of the house, and I wondered what it was. Then, All along that side of the wall was what I can only describe as a swooshing sound. I pictured someone using a leafy branch just making swirls with it on the other side. Just a scratchy sort of swirling sound. I hopped out of bed to see what the heck that was. It had to be people. I ran outside and over to the outside of the house, and there was no one. They could have run away, I suppose, but it was just really odd to me. This happened a few more times too before I finally answered that knock with a loud hello. The knock itself sounded like a person's knock, intentional to get attention. Not like a tapping or something bouncing off the wall. It was two distinct knocks. There was a hesitation, and then it knocked 3 times. I asked who's there. Then the knocking started going hard and fast. It sounded angry and loud. At that, I took off to check the outside again, but nobody was there, and this time I got there quickly too. I went back inside, back to the bedroom. The frantic loud knocking was now accompanied by that swirling sound, and it moved from the left side of the wall to the ceiling. I won't lie, because that one scared me. I called my friend, and then she told me that I was not supposed to ever answer the knock or go outside for 2 reasons apparently. If it had been a person scaring me, I could have been hurt, which I'll admit was good advice. And second, whatever that was, it was bad and I interacted with it. Now, this went on for nearly 30 minutes. I left the bedroom to go sit, shaking in the living room while I just chatted with my friend. She wouldn't accept any pictures or videos of it either. But after that occurrence, I made sure to ignore all noises and just act like everything was okay. And surprisingly, the activity, it died down. We painted the back room, but it didn't seem to make it brighter. It always stayed gloomy. And when we attempted to sleep in the master bedroom with the ensuite at the back of the house, neither one of us could sleep. I was facing the bedroom door, and several times when I woke up, that door would be open again. I felt as though someone was staring at us from the kitchen each time. It was also very cold and uncomfortable in there. Because of all these things and some other things that were happening in our life, we moved away after about a year. I was born in Moscow, Russia in the early 90s, but my brother was born in 1980, and this is his story. So I was about 7 to 8 years old, and me along with my friends were the absolute biggest idiots in terms of doing stupid and dangerous things. We would make smoke bombs, fireworks, etc. out of whatever we found, and did tons of stupid other things too. Russia in the late 80s resembled the post-apocalyptic wasteland you see in movies in a lot of places, mainly because there was really no law and order, so no one cared. You were able to buy crazy things off the streets too. My father was once offered an old rocket launcher, in fact. With this, parents often just let their kids mess around in these places, so we would do stupid things in these abandoned buildings. But one day, we were messing around when one of my friends noticed someone lurking nearby. We didn't really care, we were used to seeing weird stuff, but after a bit we noticed the person was not really moving. They just sort of stood there. When he noticed that we had seen him, the man slowly walked into view. A large, bald man with a black coat, a nice one too, likely an import which was expensive at the time, and American sneakers, also very expensive. He didn't really greet us or anything, but must have seen me looking at his shoes because he just said, "Like my shoes? I have more if you want them. Come on." Now, a few things really unnerved any of us, but this dude definitely did. If you know anything about Russia in that era, this dude looked like someone you did not want to mess with. The kicker though was once he turned around, my friend noticed that he had a gun in his pants too. The second that he saw that, he just yelled gun and booked it, and we all just scattered. I heard the guy curse loudly, but I didn't see him again after that. Now, if the story ended here, it would have just been a bit of a creepy encounter, but sometime later we were no longer allowed to play in that area, and I found out much later that they had unfortunately found a child down there who was dead after horrible circumstances which I won't go into. To be honest, as a kid I never really thought much about this until my parents told me about the death, at which point the dots connected and I realized what we potentially ran away from that day. Something unexplainable happened to me yesterday morning, and I'm curious to know if this has happened to anyone else. Note too that before this, I had been having some weird experiences happen lately in my house. Bathroom light turning off on its own, hearing a voice call out my name, noises coming from my door, etc. So yesterday morning, I woke up and went on my phone right away to check my notifications. My phone had been on all night because I play relaxing music on YouTube while I'm sleeping. I have anxiety. But when I go on my phone, my notifications are just going crazy, as though my phone had been on airplane mode for the entire night. They just continuously keep spamming all at once, which I thought was weird. That's obviously not the creepy part, but I checked my notifications and I noticed a missed call or a voicemail. At first I thought it could have been a job interviewer calling me. I'd been waiting to hear back from this place, so naturally I clicked the number to call them back. And the landline phone in my house starts ringing. For context, I'm living with my grandparents and, well, they're pretty old school. I never have ever called their landline before, like ever. I only ever call my grandpa's cell. My number isn't registered on their landline and their number has never been used to call me. But this is where it gets even weirder. So, while the landline is ringing, my grandpa had just gotten back home maybe 10 minutes prior. It's approximately about 10:15 to 10:20 a.m. He was out all morning. He starts heading down the hallway towards my room. I jump out of bed, open my door. I sort of look to him in disbelief and ask, "Why'd you call me earlier?" He responds though that he hadn't. Then I show him the missed call on my phone. At this point it was apparent to me that this number that called me was definitely our landline. So I say to him, "See, you called me, you left a voicemail, and it says here missed at 9:35 a.m. My grandpa then says, "How could I have called you when I've been gone all morning? I just got back like 10 minutes ago." Well then, who did? Nobody else was in the house except me at the time when the call was made. A phone call definitely made inside of my own house. Mind you too, this phone would not just glitch and call a number that isn't even registered in its own phone book. At this point, I haven't listened to the voicemail yet. After me and my grandpa discuss what happened, I go and listen. Now, what I heard isn't super exciting or anything. It made sort of like a beep sound, but then the landline was calling me long enough to the point when you hit the voicemail box. I'm really not sure how to explain this, so if you have any similar stories or have an explanation for this, then I would genuinely love to hear it, just to ease my mind a bit, because it's definitely creeped me out. Also, I just re-listened to the voicemail carefully, and I don't think it was just a beep in the end. It was like when you put the phone down to end the call and then the beep. It only lasted 2 seconds, but that has me even more creeped out now. I'm 29 years old, and this happened when I was about 10. It does need some backstory because my childhood was very paranormal-centric in a way, so bear with me. So my mum and I have always been horror movie fans. I can't even remember far enough back to a time when I didn't like horror. We also live in Jacksonville, Florida, which is about a 45-minute drive from St. Augustine, the oldest city in the US and probably also the most haunted. All of this naturally progressed into us becoming very interested in the paranormal, so much so that my parents formed a ghost hunting team when I was about 9. I wasn't allowed on the big investigations, but I was allowed to see some really cool places. One house that we used to go to often was in Blackshear, GA, and the family there became lifelong friends even when they moved to Kentucky. They were even on an episode on Dead Files. I have a lot of great memories from those days that I'll probably never forget. But one of the scariest memories is one that I'll also never forget. My parents and I went on a trip to California because my dad had to go for work and we all went. While he was doing his meetings, my mum and I visited Disneyland, and it felt like a really fun vacation. One evening during that trip, the three of us went on a ghost tour at the Queen Mary. I don't remember much of that tour because it was a little bit boring. Mostly the tour guide doing knock once for yes, two for no kinds of questions in haunted areas. The stories were fascinating, and the energy there was extremely sad and also very oppressive for me. One of the stops on that tour was the first-class swimming pool and its attached dressing room, which essentially just looked like a public bathroom with stalls and no doors. This area definitely had the worst energy of the whole ship, but there was supposedly some kind of mean trickster spirit that hung around there or whatever. And I think that I experienced that spirit when we were there. So we were in the dressing room and the tour guide decided to try something. She had one person go into each of the stalls of the dressing room, and she told everyone to turn off all the flashlights and cameras and just sit there and see what might happen. As soon as the room went black, within a few seconds, something grabbed my upper arm and exhaled straight into my ear. I mean, I felt the warmth and everything. It scared me to death, so much so that I immediately yelled and came running out as the lights were turned back on, and I actually cried for my mum. I've heard recently that around that time is when they blocked off that area and stopped doing tours there as well. And while I don't think that something that happened to me would have been the sole cause of it, I can't help wonder if either it was my experience that made them stop tours in there, or that something like that happened to others and they decided to close it up for safety reasons. I know that this has stuck with me even to today, and I watch a lot of paranormal investigators on YouTube, and I watched one where someone was able to get into the first-class pool, and I instantly could feel that energy again. It felt almost like a panic attack sort of feeling. It was a terrifying encounter for me, and I vowed to never go back there again. But I think that I may do it for a sense of closure, I guess. I don't know if I'll get the chance to, but it certainly would be interesting. This didn't happen to me, but to a friend of mine who witnessed a bizarre moment with his friends in the woods. This would have taken place around 2006 in Cornwall, in the UK. I was a part of the alternative crowd back then, but had a few sort of towny chav friends as well, one of which was a guy called Richard. For those that don't know, the towny folks tend to be the run-of-the-mill working class types who are a bit rough around the edges, but as a rule very down to earth. Zero interest in paranormal as well, unless they can snort it or steal it. But Richard is at a party in a place called Baldu Woods one night. Side note as well, Baldu Woods is infamous for being associated with all manner of occult practice, from witches and warlocks to devil worshippers. This was due in part to there being a south-facing church in the woods. But allegedly all sorts of nefarious activity occurred in and around this place a long time ago, but not within the last 20 years or so. Not that any townie would be interested or even bothered by these anecdotes. Two completely different worlds, really. But anyway, Richard and a group of 15 to 20 people were partying in the woods one night, There was some alcohol and drugs involved, but not for Richard and a couple of other people who were driving that night. They made a bonfire and drink was no doubt flowing at this point. They partied until around 1 a.m. when they decided to move on to a house party in a nearby town. They put out the fire and then started to make their way out to the woods. Now, there's a lot of trails through Baldu. It's a popular woods during the daytime, but Richard left the path to go and take a pee against a tree at one point. He didn't venture far, literally just a few meters off the path, behind some bushes and up to this huge tree. He started doing his business and then heard the creaking of branches above him. He stepped back and looked up to see a huge black mass falling down towards him. He jumped back and screamed, causing the group to come storming through the bushes, and they all witnessed what had fallen from 40 or 50 feet above the tree line. It was a huge black object, moving and twisting on the floor. It was smooth, shiny, and the way they described it resembled a bin bag. They didn't say that it was a bin bag, but that's just the closest thing that they could compare it to. It writhed back and forth though, seemingly not interested or even aware of the group. Regardless though, they didn't stick around. They stared in fear and disbelief for a few moments, and then ran back to the path and to their cars. Now, Richard really isn't prone to flights of fancy. He has no interest in anything otherworldly or paranormal. When he told me this story, he was dead serious about it and had a sort of fearful, confused demeanor about him, which was very out of character. Also, at least 15 other people witnessed it too, and I have no reason to disbelieve this account. Two things he noted though that really stuck with me. One was the size of this thing. He compared it to my brother. My brother is 6'4" and was around 120 kilos back then. Hefty lad. But it didn't really have the shape of a person, he said. Just a big mass. Like a very large person was put into a huge bin bag. The second was apparently the lack of noise that it made. It had fallen from a height of almost 50 feet and landed on the hard woodland floor, but there was no heavy breathing, no grunting, growling, or yelping, no moan or cry for help or anything. In fact, no sound apart from the noise that it made from writhing around on the forest floor. And that is really weird. I've always been a bit of a sensitive person, asking questions that no small child should know, predicting people's behaviors and consequently being ignored only for it to come true later, having dreams that end up happening, and never having sleep paralysis. Now, my family had recently inspected a house to move into, and upon stepping into the threshold, I just said no, not this one, absolutely not this, and refused to enter any further. I sensed danger and waited outside, probably coming across as a grumpy teenager. We moved in anyway, and I finally get my own bedroom, which I was afraid to enter. It just felt wrong. Worse than anywhere else in the house, not including the basement even. From there, things started to go downhill as well. My brother, who is very mentally ill, can't sleep anymore, shouts and gets into anxiety-induced frenzies far more often than he ever did. My mum, who had previously been harsh towards me whenever my brother acted up, started to get even angrier as well. So angry, in fact, that it escalated to physical violence and hours upon hours of screaming, bursting into my room, and generally being someone that I couldn't recognize as my mother anymore. My sister, she became completely disassociated. She'd blame me for angering my mother, and in turn my brother would join the shouting matches. This never happened previously in our old home though, and it coincided when I started waking in the night to see a man standing inside my bedroom by the window. Some say that he was the Hat Man, but I never saw a hat and he was always in my room, never on the threshold, and I would always move. What I mean is that I wasn't in a dream state because my coping method was to immediately roll over when I saw him. I started regularly having to burn sage in my room, and on those nights I'd be able to sleep peacefully. The only saving grace to this entire household was my dear beloved parrot, whom I named Lenzo. He was with me all the time, lived in my room at night after I started saging, and followed me about on my shoulder. Then there was this, lull of activity. I found out that my mum brought a priest into the house because she was experiencing a man in her room now. It didn't last long though, because the man came back. And this time when I saw him, he was closer, by the end of my bed rather than the window. So I rolled over and eventually came face to face with the man looking into my eyes. He'd somehow moved so quickly that when I rolled over, he was able to look me right in the eyes as if to say, "You can't pretend I'm not here." I don't want to describe his face because, honestly, it sort of freaks me out. But he had blue eyes, and that's as much as I'm willing to share. And he did actually speak too, quietly, in a way that felt like I was sort of imagining it, I guess. But he said, "I'm going to kill Lenzo." I couldn't scream, my voice was gone. However, I pulled my blankets over my head, rolled over, turned on the light, and got out of the bed. I immediately started incensing the room and, in true Australian fashion, started cussing this thing out of pure rage and fear. I can't remember what I said exactly, but it was something like, "Over my dead body, you ugly freak. Show yourself in the light and fight me right here, right now." Obviously, nothing happened. I really don't want to say too much, but what I will say is that an accident happened. Lenzo's sidebar entrance to his cage was in perfect working order, and it had broken off of its hinges on the one day that no one was home, and I returned to find that the neighbor's cat had somehow got inside the house and, well, yeah, you can imagine the rest. My mother said that she never forgot the sound of the screams that I made upon seeing what had happened. And to be honest, I don't really care if anyone believes me or not, but I refuse to chalk any of this up to nightmares or sleep paralysis or something like that. There's just more to the goings on here. So, I was deep in the backcountry of the Rocky Mountain National Park while backpacking with a group from the camp. It was a long hike to our first campsite, so everyone was exhausted when we got there. I had quite a few friends get on the program with me, so we spaced out in a few tents around the campgrounds. After we ate dinner, we all agreed to take it easy that night and go to sleep. A few hours after everyone had gone to bed, though, I awoke to heavy footsteps approaching my tent. A moment later, I heard my friend's voice silently call my name. He asked me to go with him to the bathroom. It was protocol for a camper to bring a buddy to the bathroom at night, in case something happened, but the buddy was supposed to be from your tent. I told him to get someone from his own tent to take him, as I was tired and extremely cold. He continued to insist that I went with him, but again I said no. He sounded extremely frustrated, but eventually gave in and left my tent. As I listened to him walk away, the only footsteps that I heard were heading into the woods around our campsite. There was no tent zipper, no whispering about somebody else accompanying him to the bathroom, just heavy footsteps slowly walking into the woods. It was then, too, that I had an uneasy feeling after that, but I slowly went back to sleep and eventually I woke up in the morning. In the morning, too, I asked him if he got someone else to go to the bathroom with him, but he said that he never woke up that night. Throughout the hike to the next campsite, I asked his tent mates if they heard him leaving or entering their tent, but they said that they never woke up. I asked my friend again if he remembers waking up that night, but he said that he's positive that he didn't. After that, my first assumption was that he was sleepwalking, so I asked him if he had a history of doing that, but he said no. After that, I started to think about how odd the interaction between me and him was. What I mean is that his words were a bit slurred, and he kept insisting that I go into the woods with him. To this day, I still wonder about that event, and exactly what happened that night. My name is Edgar, and I'm 16 years old. I'm from the Netherlands, and when I was around 7 to 8, I can't remember the exact age, but it was around 2014 to 2015, and was a warm summer day. I was alone out in the garden playing in the pool. I loved playing outside in that garden, even up until this day. I was just swimming and playing with toy soldiers for like an hour. Then I stood out of the pool and looked up straight, and on top of my shed I saw a very tall figure crouching down. I could tell it was tall because it had its knees just above its head when crouching. Its right arm was gripping the gutter drain on the side of the shed, and the other one was holding itself up on the roof. It had jet black skin and a dirty grin on its face. The smile was all the way up to its ears as well, and it had bright white eyes. As soon as it noticed that I saw it, its pupils went pinpoint, but its smile stayed the same, and after around 10 seconds, it felt like hours, it just jumped into the bush beside the shed, and to be honest, I actually did wet myself. Then I stared at the bush for like 2 minutes, just frozen in shock, before running inside and telling my parents. My mum, she didn't believe me until years later when I brought up the story again, and she said that she knew that I saw something, just wasn't sure what it was. I had many different drawings on the thing, and I've written many stories in school about the thing that I saw. I didn't go near that bush or that shed for years, and sometimes when I'm out and about, I feel that feeling of being watched out there. And I don't mean that in the sort of dark, creepy stairs, running up sort of feeling, but I mean the feeling of actually being watched. From the start of last year, I became an Orthodox Christian, and that feeling just suddenly stopped. I know many people will think that I'm lying about this, but I swear that this actually happened, and it definitely traumatized me for a long time. I remember almost every detail, and it's honestly something that I wish I could forget. So this happened when I was around 14 or so, 1999 or 2000-ish. And I lived in southwest Georgia at the time, outside of the small town of Moultrie. I was at my buddy's house for the weekend. His name was Joe. Some random other teams that were a little bit older than us show up to Joe's house, allegedly running from the cops after they stole a parent's car and wrecked it in a ditch. They came up to us on foot, so the story might be true, but I'm still not sure. Whatever the case, they wanted to go camp out in the woods to avoid pursuit, so Joe and I say, to heck with it, and we go with them. We borrowed Joe's dad's tent and started walking off into the fields or woods. Given this area is not super isolated, but there was a sort of weirdness to the air that is hard to describe, we go maybe a mile or two back and set up camp maybe 50 yards away from the turnaround end of the dirt road. There were 5 of us guys, including me and Joe, and I only remember one other dude's name, which his name was Mike. The names don't really matter, I suppose, all that much, but I just thought that I'd add that detail, all the things that I can recall. Anyway, we mess around in the woods for a while. We started a fire and ate some snacks. We didn't have any drugs except for a bottle of booze, small enough that not any one of us could get drunk off of it, but we share some sips anyway. Night comes around and we've got this 6-person tent for us. I can't say if I ever fell asleep or not, but I laid down with everyone and it got pretty late. Now, I'm not sure what time exactly it was, but likely late night or early in the morning. I began to hear footsteps in the woods some ways out. I heard this walking in the woods, and at first I'm like, it must be an armadillo. If you aren't aware, they can sound exactly like a person while foraging for food. But no, the steps are approaching our camp directly. At this point, I'm sort of WTFing hard, and without moving much because I'm terrified, I look around to see if the other dudes got up, and I missed it. But no, 5 dudes in the tent. My blood freezes at that, and there's no sound outside except this thing walking, and it's now right outside of our camp. As I attempt to breathe without making a sound, either a very pointed finger or perhaps a knife slowly starts from one point of the tent outside and drags very slowly across to the other side. I promptly wet myself at that and held my breath. The walking sounds, they stop about 3 feet on the other side of our tent, and they never start up again. Daylight slowly fades in. The steps never returned. I have this sort of dazed feeling as if I've been up all night as sunrise happens. One of the guys gets up and slowly others do too, so I get up. No one is talking, but everybody looks exhausted. Eventually, one of us asks the others, "Did you hear that last night?" Apparently 4 of the 5 guys were all awake during this invisible stalker, and we all had no idea what it was. The 3 guys who were running from the cops, allegedly, say that they want to call a friend to pick them up and go score some pot or whatever. They leave Joe and I at the camp to guard their stuff. Hooray. But now I'm paranoid at this point, because now I think that there's some guy out here waiting to gut us. But, I mean, I only have a small pocket knife on me to defend myself with. I take it out anyway as they walk down the road to call for a ride. Joe and I are sitting on this discarded door that somebody ditched on the edge of this dirt road, turnaround, like a pair of idiots, when we start hearing the walking sounds again, but across the road on the other side of the woods this time. We look over there, but we don't see anyone. In fact, there's really nothing there. But it's daylight now, so I'm like, well, it must just be an animal. This dirt road goes off and curves to our left, and the sounds approach slowly at the same pace as before. The sounds stop. We're looking at the road. There's absolutely nothing there. And the sounds then suddenly pick up on the other side of the road. But again, we don't see anything. Now, I'm scared. I notice Joe has his head buried in his knees like an ostrich burying its head in the sand. And since I'm terrified as well for the second time in the past 12 hours, I also put my head in my lap. I also place the pocket knife in open and hold it closely. The steps, I can still hear them though, and they are now slowly circling me and Joe. That is to say that they went kind of behind us at that same slow pace. They seemed to get directly behind me, but I would say maybe about 30 feet away. They then slowly walk up to my back, my spine tingling more and more the entire time. I'm pouring sweat at this point, and as they approach directly behind me, I jump up and swing this little baby pocket knife around like I know what I'm doing. Time seemed to slow down during this little bit, but as I'm swinging the knife at a puff of air, really, the car with the other 3 guys is now coming around the corner of the dirt road to pick us up. At that, Joe and I just ran to the car and we jump in. The 3 dudes ditch everything that we had at that camp. No one asks Joe and I what's wrong, but I could tell that they were looking at us and knew that something else happened. Joe and I, we never said a word about it, and we never went back there. Back in 2008, whilst enlisting in the Navy, I stayed at my parents' house while I was going through the recruitment process. My parents, They live in a very small community surrounded by forestry, about 300 kilometers from the coast. Now, one night in mid-October, we were watching TV in the lounge room, and we heard what we thought initially was to be helicopters going over the roof, very low, like a sort of loud humming sound, a bit like an idling train. It went over the house from east to west. The ceiling lights in my parents' house, they're suspended. They were swinging back and forth, and I looked at my mother puzzled. She looked at me quite puzzled. We both went out on the veranda, and we couldn't see anything. We noticed the neighbors across the street also came out, complaining that their lights went all funny and their TV is now not working. We really didn't think much of it because, nothing else happened that night. It was just a helicopter that caused a lot of disturbance. Now, the following night, my mother complained of a double ear infection and went to bed early at about 8 p.m. I stayed up until about 10, and at first I smelt something like it was dead. I was puzzled because, the house was locked up, so I just ignored it and continued watching Foxtel. I was laying in the lounge room floor with a pillow facing the TV, and it was then that I could feel something watching me from the dining room. I could just feel it, so I turned around, and I saw what was this 3 to 4 foot blotchy grey thing with a huge head, long arms down to near the knees, really skinny extremities, no ears, no nose, small mouth, and huge jet black eyes, step back from the kitchen table. I didn't know what it was. I was quite terrified. After about 2 minutes of processing it, I felt that it didn't really want to harm me, I guess. It was just observing me. But then I got the flight or fight sort of feeling. I went to the kitchen, grabbed the biggest knife that I could find, and I wanted whatever the heck this was out of the house now. I was going towards the computer room when I heard like a high-pitched screeching sound, like the old disposable camera flash. Then there was a quick flash of red light from under the computer room door as it was shutting. As I opened the computer room door, the Venetian blinds moved a lot, but the window was closed. I had this sense of dread not to go into that room, and specifically not to go into the far left-hand corner. It's hard to describe the feeling that I got, but I just sort of shut the door after a visual inspection. I went back to wherever it was I was standing as I thought that I was seeing things, hallucinating. But I remember clearly that you could see in the carpet where it was standing. You could see like little footprints. That was when I knew that I wasn't dreaming, and that's when panic set in. I went throughout the rest of the house to check everything. Everything else, and it was all locked and deadbolted. I don't know how it got in fact, but if I didn't smell it, I would not have turned around to look at it. For the rest of the evening, all of the sensor lights around the property kept going on and off, and I could hear something in the grass, something very, very quick, and all I did was shut all the blinds and windows and stayed up all night. I couldn't sleep. I was too terrified to. Eventually, when the sun rose, everything just sort of stopped, and I didn't hear or smell anything. I looked around the house, but that foreboding feeling was now gone. To this day, it's still hard to talk about it as it's affected me throughout my life. I have this feeling that I've seen it before and I'm going to see it again. I don't want to see it again, but I feel like it's been watching me for some time. Since the incident, my mother has been complaining of paranormal things happening in the house too. Quite a few times, we've seen min-min lights, unexplained lights throughout the forestry. I personally have seen a large silver sphere, but I don't know what that was. It just sort of disappeared. Speaking to locals after my experience, I was quite hesitant to at first. A few of them stated that there's always been weird lights in the skies out here, and sometimes they get weird smells throughout the house as well. This is the first time that I've publicly shared this. I've kept this to myself all these years because I guess I just don't want to be branded a nut job. But the experience, it was real. If you have any questions, then please do drop them in the comment section below and I'll try and clarify, I guess. This happened while in my early 20s, when my best friend was always getting into risky stuff. While she did various drugs, I was always more of a weed head, I guess. When they said that pot was a gateway drug, I believe it's true to a certain extent with those who have addictive personalities. She definitely developed an addiction issue later on as well. My friend, her name was KK, and she was always down to meet people. She used to friend random people on Facebook or Instagram. She would ask me to hang out so that when they went to meet new people, I was the buffer just in case they didn't like each other. Now one day, she came over to my house unannounced and was like, "Hey, let's go to my uncle's house," because her aunt was there and her aunt had some goods. Her aunts happened to be down the road anyway. Her aunt and her uncle were down as dealers in the area, so we went. When we got there, she was like, "Hey, I met this guy online. He goes by Joey Crack." Then she shows her aunts his pictures, and he was a white-set man with a red goofy face, cornrow braids, face tattoos, and a gold grill. I laughed, honestly, and said, "Wow, Kay, you really know how to pick him." She had already invited him over, and upon his arrival, he then comes out of nowhere and just walks right up and gives Kay a hug, and everyone else there as well, a kiss on the cheek. In this part of town, there really was nothing around, just houses, a school, and woods. Closest store was about 20 minutes away, so it struck me as odd that he walked here. It was me, Kay, her aunt, and the aunt's friend. We sit and smoke for a bit, and by this time both aunts are high, so they leave and go inside the house, leaving me, Kay, and Joey Crack outside. Joey then starts asking us questions like how we know each other, what we do for a living, etc. It was getting late, so I was telling her that I was going to go home. She was like, "No, don't go yet." I told her, though, that I was tired and that Joey's weird, and he kept low-key hitting on me as well. She then tells me that he apparently asked to sleep with her and he wanted to ask her to ask if I was down as well. I laughed that one off and said, "Yeah, right." And after a while of silence, I deflected and heard some noise that was in the darkness. "Hey, did you hear that?" After a bit of small talk between him and Kay, he then learned that neither one of us was interested. It was just a hangout at this point. But this then turns the mood, and you could feel it right away. It was suddenly eerily quiet. He got reserved and shifty-eyed. I sat down for a while just to please Kay. At one point, I turned to Joey, knowing he walked here and it was dark by now, and asked, "So, what are you going to do? Because I'm about to go home and Kay's coming with me." He was like, "I just texted my boy. He's about to come out here and get me." When he was texting, Kay was right behind him watching him text, and her eyes grew wide and she looked at me. It was that sort of silent girl code of WTF, we need to get out of here. Kay broke the silence and was like, "Hey, come help me get this thing from inside to bring it out." So I did. We went inside and she was like, "I'm about to call my uncle so that he can take us to your place." And I was like, "Why?" My house was like a 10-minute walk anyway. And she said because when she was looking at Joey's text, he sent to whoever was coming to pick him up the information of all of us here. He also noted that her aunts were high and also our ages. He was basically telling his boy to come over and basically rob and assault us, and called dibs on the blonde one. I was the blonde one. Every hair on my body suddenly stood up with the thought of some gross goon trying to have his way with me. I was mad too because, she had gotten me into this mess. We came back out though and continued our conversation with him so he wouldn't get suspicious of us. She mentions out loud that her uncle was on his way home, and as he pulls in, a sigh of relief just washes over me. They speak briefly and Joey then departs into the darkness before his ride even shows up. Kay and I, we get a ride from her uncle to my house, and on the ride we noted just how weird Joey was. Later that night, as I was going to bed, I check my Facebook and I have a friend request from Joey in a message. "You're so pretty. I would love some alone time with you without your friend." The message ended with his number, and I have never blocked someone so fast. After this, unfortunately, Kay didn't learn her lesson, but that's another story for another time. But a week later, Joey was actually in the news. He was wanted for sexual assault, robbery, and drug possession. Which means that was a bullet well missed on my part. This happened to me, I think, about 2 months ago, but speaking about it still freaks me out, especially if I'm in my house, because it's like he's listening. A few days a week, I have to get my brother and myself up for school because both my parents work in the early mornings. One morning, I was coming back upstairs after giving my brother a little wake-up reminder. I was heading back to my parents' room to lay down. We have 2 dogs, so I lay with them in their room on those mornings. But as I was walking down the hallway, I felt this, like a very strong sense of unease, I guess. I've always had incredibly strong intuition, and so I always trust these feelings. I felt like I shouldn't look up too much, so I looked at the bottom of the door frame, and when I did, I saw 2 legs. They were the legs of the figure of a man standing in the doorframe of my parents' bedroom. A very loud voice in the back of my head said, "Don't look at him." I closed my eyes immediately and didn't open them, even as I laid down. And I know that this is going to sound a bit weird, but suddenly I sort of fell asleep, I guess. I had a dream, and I never dream, and even if I do, I never remember them unless they are very important. I've only had 3 dreams in the last 5 years, this being one of them. But in the dream, I was walking down a path in a sunny field with a woman whose face was hidden by sunlight, but she was beautiful. She told me, in the exact same voice from my head, "Don't look at him." All of a sudden, I then woke up feeling very uneasy again, but I didn't see the figure again that day. Again, I know that sounds really weird, but that's what happened. At the moment, I also don't really see him like I did that day, but I know that he's there. I can sort of feel him like I did that day as well. It always freaks me out though, and my heart is racing, even just talking about this. So, for context for this story, I live in a pretty rural area, I guess you could say. We live on the outskirts of our town, which is already small compared to the populations of other towns in California. We're also about 15 minutes from the small town that we live by, and 40 minutes from the main city. We live down a dirt road with some neighbours. Our house has no other fences attached to ours, and on 2 sides of the house is only fields and dirt roads. One side has a single house and the field is all. The other 2 sides have a couple of neighbours down other roads, and nobody really interacts out here except my dad talking to 2 of them sometimes. Now, I was probably 12 when this happened. I had low self-esteem and I wanted to start exercising more. I had been enrolled in a charter school due to bullying. Yes, that played into my self-esteem, but let's not get into that story. So I didn't really have many ways of exercising besides a treadmill that we owned. I wanted to start getting fresh air too, so My mother suggested that since we live out here, that it would be peaceful to take walks down the back dirt road. I agreed, even though I was stubborn about it half the time, but we began walking, and usually we would go into the mid to late afternoon, when it would start cooling down outside, but was still light out. In case it got dark, we took our flashlight too. Being out here, it was notorious for stray dogs to sometimes make their way out here as well, and we would carry pepper spray and a mini bat, just in case one got vicious. And one day, me and my mum decided to go on a walk in the late afternoon. So me and my mum took off and started walking down the road. When we walked about maybe a quarter of the mile down there, you sort of start to come towards a little cross section. There's a road going left to the highway, a road going right to the neighbor's house, or the road goes straight down to a utility road. Me and my mum discussed walking down the utility road to get a good walk in since it went on for a while. When we were about to get to the crossroad, this dog came out of, well, pretty much literally nowhere. We were looking at it and it was in the center of the road just sort of staring at us. Me and my mum looked at it and my mum said that she got this feeling in her stomach that we needed to turn around and walk home. So she grabbed my arm and started leading me back home, and then let go so that we could walk. We were in the midst of walking when she looks ahead and stops to stare at something. I ask what she's looking at, and she points. There's what seems to be a white car pulled up to our fence and quickly backed up and shot down the road on the side of our house. Mind you, nobody ever goes down this road except one old man that we know. Anyone else who does this usually is scoping out my dad's tools to steal. Now, my mum said that she felt a bit uneasy because of it and pulled me to the edge of the dirt road, almost into the field. The car had driven to the highway and left. Or so we thought. We continued walking back to my house when this car comes back and drives down the road that we were walking alongside. I caught a glimpse, and it was this smaller white car with black tinted windows that you couldn't see through. My mum instantly got a feeling of impending doom and pulled me into the field, not too far, but far enough that we couldn't be seen. We kept walking through the field towards our house, getting closer now, when this car comes back down the road. My mum stops me in my tracks to see what the car is doing, and it drives back to our house and starts driving around it super quickly. For context, we have a random road and area that goes around our yard on our property. Now, my mum waits until the car drives back down the side road, and she tells me that we need to start running. So that's what we did. We started running through the field, getting to one of the little sections near my yard. The car comes back and drives down the road trying to cut us off. Me and my mum are panicking at this point and have no idea who this is and why they're acting like this. The car circles around again and my mum drags me further to the right, I think, of where we were and told me that we were going to run down into the ditch. We got down in the ditch and that's when the car comes back around and suddenly pulls to the edge of the ditch where we were. The front of the car was facing us and all I could think about was if it drove down, it would definitely hit me and my mum and probably kill us. My mum quickly put her arm in front of me and stood dead still while I was literally horrified and dropped our flashlight and I think my water bottle as well. The car, though, was getting ready to drive down where we were, and then suddenly they backed up and drove around the yard again, going back down the side road to the highway. Me and my mum honestly felt like our souls almost left our bodies, and she tells me to run, don't look back, and get to the front gate. I run up the ditch, feeling my heart pounding. I run around the yard and towards the front gate, flinging it open, and I started running towards the front door. I didn't hear my mum behind me, but I was running to the door to open it, right when I looked over and I saw the car coming back down the side road. I ran into the house trying to catch my breath. I saw the car drive down the road and I didn't see my mum anywhere, so I was panicking. I ran towards the sliding glass door, and suddenly my mum comes running towards it and flings it open, running in and locking it. She tells me to go and lock the front door. I was trying to catch my breath and trying to tell her that I was scared because I had no idea where she was. She went to chug some water from the fridge and told me that when I was running, she was trying to shut the front gate when she noticed the car coming back down the road. She said that she knew that she wouldn't have time to follow me to the door, so she ran behind my sister's car to stay out of view of this car, and when it drove back down the road, she took the opportunity to run back to the door since it was closer to my sister's car. Once we caught our breath and we locked all the doors, we checked out the windows, but the car, well, it was gone at this point. It is crazy to think, though, that if we hadn't have seen that dog standing there in the road that day and decided to turn back, that we may have actually been run down. Fortunately, we haven't seen that car again, and I think it may have just been some crazy person or druggie who just so happened to come down our road that day. Well, that's what I tell myself at least. But truly, I have no idea who that person was or people were. Just that they seem to be looking for us, and I have no idea why that was. I'm going to start this off by saying that I do follow pagan principles. Not Wiccan, but true folk magic and spiritual practices, and wholeheartedly believe in worlds that are not seen to the naked eye, unless they want us to, that is. And I know what I saw, I know what I felt. Now, I've encountered the paranormal many times, as I love to go out to cemeteries and converse with the other side, safely and with the correct precautions and conclusions, of course. I'm no stranger to the unknown and the unseen. I've encountered a skinwalker and saw it with my own eyes, but I haven't felt this scared since my one and only encounter with one. Last night, I, a 24-year-old female, was driving from my parents' house. I was out of a job for a while and couldn't afford living on my own until I found one. I'm a pre-K special education teacher, not a bum but in need of help. To a friend's house to help her go through her first baby's baby clothes in order to get ready for baby number 2. She lives about 10 minutes away and I know her route like the back of my hand, as I've driven it dozens of times. I'm jamming out to Hamilton as one does. I'm putting my heart and soul into this one-woman show and truly feeling the feelings behind each character's lines. I'm sort of pouring my soul into it, and I was in my spiritual happy place, I guess you could say. Everything was fine, until all of a sudden it wasn't. I'm about 2 miles away from her house when I just feel my arms pull me down this road that I have never seen before. I start driving down it, and I go to turn on my GPS to help me figure something out. But when I did, it wasn't there. I notice that there's one light pole on the road, and I've passed it, and there's an overwhelming sense of dread that was growing thicker and heavier every inch my wheels turned. And oh, I messed up feeling suddenly hit me, and this is not safe feeling as well. I immediately find a way to do a 3-point turn and get my happy butt the heck out of Dodge. I get to my friend's house and I'm a shaking mess at this point, pulling everything that I needed inside. I tell this to her and her husband, and they look at each other like, what the heck, because I'm never scared like that. They start asking me questions about where the road was, what happened, did I see anything. I tell them my skinwalker story and told them that I haven't been this frightened since that day, and they were honestly in shock. I immediately did an egg cleanse because that stuff was not staying with me all night long and keeping me awake. Needless to say, I was not comfortable going back outside, so I stayed the night with them. I didn't sleep a wink, and I've been up for about 30 hours now. I drove home about 30 minutes ago, and I can assure you that that road was not there on my way home. I know that location very well as well, and I can assure you that that road It shouldn't have been there. There was something very wrong that night, and I'm wondering if you have any thoughts, answers, or questions. If anyone has experienced anything like this before, this sort of phantom road thing, then I would really love to hear it. My husband had a history of his heart rate dropping into the low 40s. This morning, it started happening again and he collapsed once, got up and said that I needed to call 911. He said that something was different this time too. By the time the paramedics got him to the hospital, his heart rate was down to 20. He was surrounded by a team of nurses and doctors trying everything to bring his heart rate up. And this is when things got weird. They started shocking his heart to get it into a normal rhythm. Each shock, he said, was extremely painful. During these shocks, my husband looks up in the room full of doctors and nurses and sees an older woman in normal clothing, no badge on, and she approaches him. But this was during all of the chaos of multiple medical staff trying to save his life. The older woman reaches him and whispers in his ear. She tells him not to worry and that everything will be okay. As she was speaking to him, an incredible warmth filled his body, and any fear that he had went away and he felt calm. The woman walks away. The doctors determine that he needs an emergency pacemaker installed. He has the surgery and then things get even weirder. In ICU recovering, he shares the story with me about the lady in the ER. While sharing his story with me, he's very emotional and even crying. I ask the nurse if there would have been anyone in the ER that would have approached him like the old lady in street clothes did, and she said no way. So this is definitely getting weirder at this point. For context, my husband is a 43-year-old, pretty much an atheist who doesn't believe in ghosts or angels or anything really. After a few days, he's released from hospital and he goes home. I post this amazing story on Facebook. A couple of days pass and our take on reality is shook to our core. I am sleeping on his third day home when I hear him screaming and crying. It's her, he says. I run to the room that he is in and he's bawling. I ask what's wrong and he shows me a picture on his phone. It's an obituary featuring a picture of an older lady. It's her, he cries. The obituary was text to him from a close friend of ours. She had saw my post about his ER experience and did a search of the people who had died in the hospital the same day that he was in the ER. And the lady that I was looking at had actually died around the same time that he was in the ER. What the heck, right? So, this happened just a few years ago. We were on a family vacation in Cancun, husband, teen son, and I. We were staying at a resort at that time. I was the first to wake up and went to the restroom. There are huge windows covering up one wall, so we have the blackout curtains pulled over, so it's still kind of dark in the room. As I come back to bed, I can see a little bit of the morning light coming through the bottom of the room door. So I lay back on the bed facing my husband, and all of a sudden, he's shaking. He's facing away from me and towards the restroom. I put my hand on his arm and lightly move him and say, "Are you okay?" He turns over to me and says that I just had a night terror and I saw him. He explained that as I was shaking him, the black figure that he saw got off of him and walked away, and he could see it was wearing gold and had a huge thing on its head like a crown or feathers of some kind. We both lay there staring around the room. I noticed the hallway to the restroom was extra dark all of a sudden. I pointed and my husband and I both saw a shadow and it moves up onto the wall and there was a door to a room conjoined to ours. The shadow moves toward the door, all the while we're just staring. All of a sudden, the shadow disappears, and then a second later, you hear a blood-curdling scream. I'm guessing that there was a little girl in the room next door because that's what we hear, and we both look at each other with huge eyes. But we're both freaked out and get up and open the curtains to let the light in, and we just talk about what we had just experienced. It was absolutely terrifying, and we both thanked God that that was our last night there. So my mum's side of the family had a huge ranch down in Mexico. We used to go on weekends since we lived close to the border. This ranch consisted of 7 homes, divided by a street going down the middle, and 4 homes on one side and 3 on the other. They were almost as if in a circle as well. Anyways, my aunts and cousins would always tell us stories of the things that happened, and balls of light that they would see out there. One time we went there was a wedding party, so we were of course spending the night. And well, there were so many invited that there wasn't room for us to sleep in any of my aunt's homes, except of course for the house that no one lives in because my mum's uncle had supposedly done some black magic there and passed away in this home. This home was a 2-room house, literally 2 whole rooms. The outside had 2 entrances to each of the rooms, and they were connected by an entryway on the inside. So, at this time, I'm around 10 years old, and it's me, my mum, my older sister, who was 11, and younger sister, who was 3. My mum inspects the room that we're to sleep in. There are 2 beds, 1 queen and 1 twin bed. My older sister ends up sleeping on the twin by herself. My mum also checks the only other room that is full of old furniture and items that you can't walk in that room, since there's just way too many things and furniture piled up everywhere. The doorway that separated the rooms had no door as well, but only a bedsheet hanging there. So, I pass out and hear all about what happened afterwards. According to them, my mum and older sister, they couldn't go to sleep that night. We don't have AC and we have the windows open so the air comes through. And well, they suddenly hear footsteps outside, as if someone was walking around the house multiple times. My mum had confirmed that the door to our room from the outside was locked. There was a door to the other room from the outside as well, when all of a sudden they hear the door to the other room open from the outside, and then things being moved and thrown around in the other room. Of course, my mum gets up and turns on the light to see if anybody is in there, but when she does, she sees no one, and is creeped out, and tells us all to wake up. I'm sort of half awake at this point, not knowing what's happening, but my mum yells that we're leaving. We go to my mum's aunt's home across the street to stay with her. My mum then starts retelling them what happened. They send some of her cousins to go and check on the house and to see if anyone had broken in. They go and come back and let us know that they didn't see any footprints around the house or anybody else inside. The next thing that my cousin says creeped us all out though. She was like, "Oh yeah, so I was getting some water, I looked out the window and I could see the house was on fire again." She said that it was normal to see it on fire since it's almost a nightly occurrence. Supposedly other people who move nearby to our ranch see the same thing as well. A huge fire, but then once they get to the ranch to warn, the fire is just gone. It's supposedly all the black magic the uncle had done that the house is haunted like crazy. We ended up getting some blankets set up for us on the floor, and we just slept there for a little bit before the sun came up. I, though, was absolutely freaked out by this point, and there was no way that I was about to go back to that house ever again. I have a lot of stories from my cousins in Mexico, but this one, for whatever reason, has just always stuck with me. I would like to share some experiences myself and my family have had, dating all the way back to the mid-1990s. For some quick context, I'm the oldest of 4 sons and we all grew up in this house. It's a small 3-bedroom home in a quiet subdivision surrounded by wilderness. My parents bought it in 1982 and they still live there today. So, I come from a very superstitious and some would call sensitive family. Most of them seem to be in tune with our extrasensory perception. In no ways do I consider myself to be a psychic or someone with extremely good precognition or clairvoyance or anything, but I do feel like I have been aware of unexplainable presences or feelings. Now, my mother explained to me that before she became pregnant with me, she never really noticed any strange or paranormal occurrences at home. When my mum got pregnant, she said that things changed. At this point, she started feeling a presence while at home. My father's work at the time had him gone for a week at a time, and my mum found herself feeling lonely and overthinking. At night, while trying to sleep, she felt like someone was in the room with her. She said that it wasn't an ominous or negative energy, but quite the opposite. As her pregnancy continued, small objects started vanishing and showing back up. She bought some wind-up toys and toys that were activated by buttons. She placed them up in a shelf in a closet, and they ended up on the closet floor, activated and playing. She says that she saw a female figure move from one room to another in the upstairs halls. At that point, she wanted to understand why the house had all these paranormal energies. But the house was newly built, not even 20 years old at that time. The previous owner was a single parent, but she never knew the age or gender of the children. My mum, she also started having complications with her pregnancy, and I was born 9 weeks premature. I spent the first 6 months of my life in the hospital, dealing with issue after issue, but I managed to pull through. I know that this isn't related to the paranormal, but it's important context to later events and theories, I guess. Now, there was a time when I was a few months old when a pair of hats my mother and great-grandmother wore to a wedding somehow got moved from the attic storage into my mum's closet. It spooked my mum momentarily, but by then she had come to terms that she was sharing space with some sort of friendly spirit, ghost, or presence or whatever. These things, they really didn't bother her too much. But besides that, not much else really ever happened. One of the strangest but more powerful things that happened in my childhood home took place when I was still very young. You see, even though I was 8 months old, I still couldn't roll myself over very well or sit up. Embarrassing, right? Sure, but I mean, what could I do? I was just a baby. My mum was home alone again with me. She put me down for a nap and went to lay down in her bedroom across the hall. She was quite tired that day, so sleep took over quickly. She says that she had a very vivid dream that day. She was in some sort of a white room. It was bright. She was sort of standing in place. She felt someone enter the space with her, though. It was a welcoming presence, one she felt before. But a more ominous feeling showed up too, almost like impending doom. Or that feeling when you just know that something just isn't right. And then she heard the voice of a girl. It told her, "The baby, it's the baby." And the voice repeated itself as she jolted awake. She sensed that something was wrong. She rushed across the hall, which luckily it was only a mere 7 feet or so into my bedroom. And I somehow had myself face down on the crib's mattress. I must have decided that it was time to move myself around, but I was clearly unable to push my face out of the mattress. Asking my mum this story now, and she'll tell you with great detail how real the dream felt and how scary it all was. As I got older, I was told around 3 or 4 that I started chatting to an imaginary friend. I would spend a lot of time sitting up in my room, stationed on my floor with all sorts of toys. I would be having full-on conversations, apparently, with no one. When my parents asked me who I was talking to, I always told them her name was Tara. I told them that she was a little girl, a bit older than me. I said that she was nice. I didn't let this up for years, I've been told. I can remember understanding at a young age, maybe 8 or 9, that our house had spirits in it. But I was raised and told that they were harmless, that they were just here with us, and I must admit that I felt it too. I didn't mind it, honestly. It really didn't scare me. What scared me, though, instead was sudden loud noises and movies about vampires, I guess, but fast forward to my teenage years now, I was sleeping on a Friday night. Across from my bed was a large dresser, and pushed beside was a longer but shorter dresser. It was tall and sturdy enough that a young person could hop up on it if they wanted to and sit on it. I remember coming out of a strange dream, and I started to wake up. I opened my eyes, and they were met with somebody else's gaze. It was a young girl, dark hair, clothes that looked like they were from decades prior. She was sat up on my dresser looking at me. I nearly jumped out of my skin because, honestly, who expects that? Now, was she scary looking? No. But I believed at the time that it was Tara. I've seen her a few other times, or possibly another female. I come home to visit my parents, and at times I get the same intense feeling. It's pretty hard to explain that feeling, but it's just like I know that one of these ghosts or spirits or whatever are around, and they're welcoming me back. I'll walk into the house, especially if I'm the first to arrive home, and the whole feel of my surroundings will just change. Again, it's hard to explain, but I've come to learn that it's the type of feeling that I get when Tara must be around. But when I'm spending time alone at the house, though, especially downstairs in the basement, I'll see a dark female figure move across the back of the room, the shape of the body reflecting off the glass paneling of my parents' bar. It'll move into the laundry room and disappear. I've seen it in reflections of windows upstairs, standing in various spots around the home, as if they're just sort of sharing space with me, as if they're just trying to say hi. I'm older now, I've just turned 30, but in all of the apartments that I've lived in, I've had paranormal experiences. Nothing too horrifying, thank goodness, but I always seem to have something happen, and I guess I'm okay with it now. Maybe I'll share some of those moments another time, but I would be lying if I tried to make my story sound like some horrid poltergeist haunting with objects thrown and evil lurking around or whatever. And while I truly believe that not all aspects of the paranormal are spooky or scary, sometimes they are pretty strange. The experiences, I guess, can be enlightening. That maybe we do share our lives with others who have passed on, who just want to make themselves known from time to time. Maybe to watch over us. Who knows? It's all very complex, but I do believe that I've had ghosts follow me around pretty much all my life.